This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Bloomberg Surveillance, Lisa Mateo, a sighting. She'll be with us in a moment. Michael Barr with us, but joining us right now, Paul. I mean, we have to talk to, if it isn't Friday, I won't eat it, correspondent Jess Matten. Paul, have you ever been in a Dave & Buster's?
No, I have not, and I'm going to try to keep it that way.
I'm so shocked. I'm shocked to hear that Paul Sweeney hasn't stepped in one.
What is the cuisine of a Dave & Buster's? Because we're certain Mateo's never been in it.
I'm sure, sliders, chicken tenders, all the good stuff, buffalo wings.
Buffalo wings.
All the above. I feel
Very
like
good.
you'd be a fan, Tom Keene.
And then stock tank. You just told Nathan Egger the stock tank?
That's right. It's down 11% in pre-market trading. So it did, unfortunately, some macro headwinds are hitting this stock.
What, the macaroni wasn't cooked right?
The macaroni wasn't on par. But Raymond James has market performed still on the stock. So they see kind of range bound right now.
It's a fun place. It's a fun family place.
It is.
Surveillance, if it isn't Friday, won't eat it correspondent Jess Matten gets us started this morning. Paul, what a nothing burger yesterday in the Fed meeting. We're all struggling for 3 hours.
Yep.
I mean, Feroli got a gray hair off of it. I mean, there's nothing going on yesterday. And the market off CPI 24 hours ago with PPI today.
Yep.
Moonshot.
I mean, it looks like the Fed is going to be cutting rates at some point. The question is when and how many times. I don't know, is it once or twice this year? Who knows? But I think all the market seems to need is just the expectation that the next Fed move will be a cut, and that's still on the table.
Just day after day. What a great guest list. Eric's spitting pumped for Father's Day.
I know. He's doing a nice job.
He's got, baby Benedict, and, it's like his first Father's Day.
Exactly.
Did you get emotional at Father's Day?
I do not.
I don't either. They said, "What do you want?" I said, "I just like somebody to fill up the Brita in the refrigerator."
Right.
Am I the only one that can fill up the Brita in the house? We say good morning to all of you. We're on YouTube here. Search Bloomberg Podcasts and subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube. Apple CarPlay. I have no idea if they're coming out with a new Apple CarPlay. I think they are. AI CarPlay. Give us Lisa Mateo.
Exactly.
Goes right there. From the Interactive Brokers Studios with our Bloomberg Business Flash, the queen of pimento omelets, Lisa Mateo.
You're welcome. Good morning. Right now we have futures mixed, and this is after the Federal Reserve. They announced no change to its benchmark interest rate. Policymakers suggesting they'll cut rates only once this year. Today there's more economic data on tap. We have initial jobless claims for last week and also the producer price index for May. So let's get to futures. We have S&P futures up about 0.1%, Dow futures down 0.3%, but we have NASDAQ futures higher, up about 0.6%. Helping give that big boost is Broadcom. Their shares up 13% after its latest results topped estimates. It also announced a 10-for-1 stock split. And we have news about Alphabet's Google. It's agreed to buy clean power from Warren Buffett's NV Energy and also a geothermal energy startup. Those shares, down about 0.5%. And sticking with tech, Bloomberg reporting OpenAI on pace for $3.4 billion of annual revenue. Quick check of the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.75%, and the 10-year yield at 4.31%. That's little change. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Well, Lisa, thanks so much. Paul, I'm going to use this 10-to-1 split.
Yeah.
NVIDIA is 127.90.
Yep.
Right now. It's up $2.
Yep.
So if it's a 10-for-1, it's up $20.
Yeah, it's just crazy.
Pre-split.
It's where that people. It's up another 2% today, up 152% year to date, and over the past 12 months, it's up 200%.
We have disclosures here. None of us own it. We're working forever. Joining us right now, Kathleen Bisjancic with Nationwide. Just wonderful, wonderful, solid market economics. What do you headline, Kathleen, after that odd press conference yesterday? How do you headline it?
Well, good morning, Tom. Happy to be with you. It was unusual. There's what really the big takeaway is there's a lack of confidence, right, in the forecasts and where we're going from here, and really just continue to emphasize data dependent. No strong convictions behind the dots, and Chairman Powell said, emphasize this, look at the incoming data, data over the dots. So that's where we are. I think when you look at the data, though, and just see the forecast,
Right.
it still leaves the door open and the possibility of two rate cuts this year.
Kathleen, Bob Michael, right at the end of it, we're going to break or something, going to the press conference. I can't remember. Bob Michael at JPMorgan said the smartest thing I heard yesterday, which is there's two Americas. And he said, what about the people? What about small business with these rates stuck higher? Is part of America tangibly being harmed by a Fed that won't cut rates?
I strongly agree that there are two Americas. It's low income, middle income households, small businesses. They're the variable borrowers. They're still struggling with the high prices. And that's very different than what you see with the large cap companies, which can easily go to market. Borrowing rates are still higher, but more reasonable. And upper income households, they're feeling pretty wealthy right now. Home prices have gone up, equity prices are going up. Their wages have kept up with inflation generally, and they're spending. So we really do have two economies here. And I think, especially, going back to small businesses, they're definitely feeling the weight. You see it in the surveys too, that there's a big difference between, how the larger companies are feeling and the small businesses.
All right. So, Kathy, given what we heard from the Fed yesterday, there's still a lot of people out there, Kathy, that's saying this Fed should be cutting rates now. That, in fact, inflation, for the most part, if you look at the real-time data, has been curbed. Are you in that camp?
So we, should they cut now? So we forecast what they're going to do. I can understand, and I can also, so we think they wait till September,
okay,
at least September. But, should they cut now? I mean, I can understand their confidence was shaken by the Q1 inflation data. But actually, if you look at the 3-month annualized rate, which we do, I know Tom likes how we slice and dice all the data, all the economists. If you look at the 3-month annualized rate for core and super core, you're back to December rates, and they were pretty confident then. So that tells you a lot.
All right, Kathy. So let's step back and talk about the U.S. consumer here, because we know there are at least two consumers out there, the folks that own assets, whether it's stocks, bonds, real estate, and those that don't. What's your call on the U.S. consumer out there these days?
So, right now, there's enough, in terms of job gains and income that have been generated and just the momentum, consumers still in really good shape now. But if the labor market starts to slow, as we think, and it doesn't have to be an abrupt slowing, just some moderation, you're going to see a pullback in the consumer. And that would be an aggregate. As we said, many are struggling. They're running up their credit card debt. They're 10% are delinquent on payments. That's more consistent with a recession than a sub 4% unemployment rate. But the consumer will and now has to rely more and more on current income, not the pent up savings, and even credit card usage. There's limits there. Now we see it with the delinquency size. So I think if the labor market slows, so will consumer spending. And we'll see slower growth at the end of this year going into next year.
And that's kind of right where I want to go, Kathy, the kind of the labor market. It's been, I think most people would feel like it's been so resilient for such a long period of time. Even if we're sitting here at 3.9 or 4% unemployment, that feels like full employment here. Do you think there's any cracks in that employment outlook?
You do beneath the surface see some cracks. You see the number of part-time workers working for economic reason, that's rising. You see multiple job users, that's picking up. So surveys also counting a little bit of that. We also know there's going to be a downward revision based on tax data for payroll growth in 2023. And we'll see about 2024. The household survey has been signaling slower growth. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, but I do think that there is going to be, continue to be this moderation, which is really underneath the surface happening. but they're not large cracks. We're not looking, for any type of abrupt drop in payroll growth.
Kathleen Vestjancic, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. She's with Nationwide, I should say, a really interesting interpretation off of the Fed meeting. Red and green on the screen, NASDAQ up 0.6%. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, Lisa, former President Donald Trump is coming back to the nation's capital for the first time since his felony conviction in New York last month. He will be meeting with GOP lawmakers for a show of their support. We get more from Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson in Washington.
He is meeting with the House Republicans and Senate Republicans to set the policy for the rest of this year, and then if they win after that. I think even if he loses, and Biden is president, Republicans in Congress will still be pushed and pulled by Donald Trump in terms of the policy that they're going to talk about before he goes and meets with the most powerful CEOs in the country.
Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson says CEOs expected to attend that meeting include JPMorgan Chase's Jamie Dimon, Jane Fraser of Citigroup, and Bank of America's Brian Moynihan. The event will be hosted by the Business Roundtable. The G7 summit is opening in Italy with an agreement on a U.S. proposal to back a $50 billion loan to Ukraine using frozen Russian assets as collateral. Diplomatic sources confirm an agreement has been reached on the deal before the leaders even landed in southern Italy for the three-day summit. A tropical disturbance has brought a rare flash flood emergency to much of southern Florida. The downpours and subsequent flooding blocked roads and floated vehicles. Dania Beach received about a foot of rain, according to Mayor A.J. Ryan.
Yesterday, I declared a state of emergency, so that opens up our funding with FEMA. And we actually, as a city, have over $40 million that we are investing for stormwater drainage projects throughout our entire city.
Floridians are prepared to weather more heavy rainfall today and tomorrow. It looks like Disney and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis are burying the hatchet. An agreement locks in a 15-year expansion plan for Disney World and clears a path for Disney to restart political donations in Florida. The ending of the feud clears the way for the $17 billion planned development at Walt Disney World near Orlando. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Huge news flow today, but I think we got to go there. I mean, the Celtics in the playoffs have won more games now than the Detroit Pistons won all year.
Thank you very much.
Is there even a contest? I mean, I'm not watching this. It's like the tension's gone, right?
I'm sorry to say that. I mean, they're so dominant. I mean, Jason Tatum, I think he put up 31 points last night.
Yeah.
And this is just a dominating performance. Red Auerbach's got to be like smiling from above. I mean, these guys are playing like a well-oiled machine.
And we mourn the death of Jerry West, who for everyone was a hero. I mean, he personified toughness.
I remember watching the old ABC Game of the Week.
Yeah.
And he was on all the time, and that just encouraged me the next day to go out and go play basketball in the backyard.
Boy, that career turned out well.
Oh yeah. Between him and Bill Walton, I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
My sixth grade teacher said, "Tom, keep skating." That was his basketball advice. Paul, can Dallas win even one?
I think they can. They got some great players, Doncic, Kyrie. But boy, it's been overwhelming by the Celtics so far.
Well, we'll see. In memory of Jerry West and also the Detroit Pistons, which we noticed
Back
well.
in the day.
NASDAQ up.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got red and green on the screen, and this is after reports show the U.S. Core Consumer Price Index, well, it fell to the lowest in more than 3 years, and the Fed pointed to just one interest rate cut this year instead of 3. So let's get right to it. We have S&P futures up 0.1%, Dow futures down 0.2%. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.6%. To the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.76%. That's little changed, and the yield on the 10-year 4.31%. And that is little changed. To commodities, we have spot gold lower at $2,313 an ounce, Brent crude $82 a barrel, WTI crude at $77 a barrel. We have Tesla shares up 7%, and this is ahead of its shareholder meeting today. Elon Musk says 2 key proposals to ratify his $56 billion pay package and to move Tesla's legal home to Texas appear to be on the way to passing. Meanwhile, Target shareholders, they rejected a proposal urging the retailer to consider paying its workers higher hourly wages. Those shares up about 0.5%. And Boeing down 0.1%. Sources say the company told the DOJ that it disagrees with the government finding that it failed to live up to a compliance agreement. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Sweeney called me up last night, total tantrum beachside, looking at the Dolphins, and he says, we got to do equity in the 7 o'clock hour. John Stolfus coming up with OpCo, who's had the courage to participate. And I'm going to suggest he was one of the very first to whisper 5,400.
Yeah, there you go.
And Stuart Kaiser's right there too. I mean, we gotta pay homage. I did a thing this morning for Ben Laidler at HSBC, now at eToro. Laidler nailed the December 2018 lift. Yep. And so we got these guys in here and women in here that said, shut up and own it, like Gina Martin Adams.
I know.
Kaiser nailed it at Citigroup.
He certainly did. Stuart Kaiser, U.S. equity trading strategy at Citi Global Markets, 390 Greenwich Street in Lower Manhattan, the worst elevators on global Wall Street. Stuart, what did you think yesterday from the CPI print, from Federal Reserve in the afternoon? What did you guys on a trading desk at Citi think about all that?
Yeah, good morning, guys. You know, I would say, look, the CPI print was unequivocally positive news, right? I mean, the print was low. The mix within the CPI data was positive. Markets responded. I think, as you might have expected, lower quality stocks did well. Stuff that had been sort of under pressure from a higher for longer narrative, rallied pretty well. And then you got the Fed. I think the Fed is sort of the mirror image of what they did back in March, which was back in March, you would have expected them to have a slightly more hawkish narrative just based on the incoming data, and they sort of tacked a little bit dovish, particularly Powell in the press conference. And I think the effort back then was to keep the market centered and not let it drift kind of too far in either direction from the base case. And I think that's really what we got yesterday in the opposite direction. You would have thought with the strong payrolls and then the friendly CPI, the Fed would have, maybe been a little bit more positive in message and a little more dovish, and Powell, I think, sounded a little hawkish. And I think that was an intentional effort to keep the market kind of centered on the base case outlook.
Does this feel like a market that just wants to move higher, given everything else that's out there, just wants to move higher? I'm quoting Alex Steele, Tom. She came up with, I think, the best call I've ever heard, which is the market feels like it just wants to go higher.
Yeah, I think it does. I think, look, you have, an economy that for now is holding in solidly. Yep. You've got double-digit EPS growth. And I think those two things, generally speaking, you'd want high, or you would expect higher equity markets in that environment. And I think that's just sort of the situation we're in. That's our view. I mean, our base case view is higher until and unless the labor market really comes under significant pressure. So, we're going to remain constructive.
In honor of you, it's so intimidating when Stuart Kaiser walks in. I mean, Lisa, we got to go mathy here. We got to go log Euclidean math. Boy. Okay, run semi-log NASDAQ, the Stuart Kaiser chart. I ran it back to November of 2018. Ben Laidler, his shingles out at HSBC at the time, and he says, there's something going on, shut up and buy. And what's important here, folks, log regression, we're barely out over one standard deviation on the trend. We're not extended in this bull market. I don't think a lot of people know that.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Tom, especially if you look at the earnings growth we're generating. I know a lot of people are concerned with the large cap tech and growth rally, but why are those stocks outperforming? Because they're the unique companies that are generating this massive kind of EPS growth, both realized and in the forecast. So, when folks push back about us being more positive, we're just sort of anchoring back to fundamentals.
People
right now.
think they're extended. I mean, I get it. NVIDIA, Lisa owns it, we don't. Fine. But the answer is the NASDAQ 100, the math doesn't show Robert Schiller exuberance like, what he wrote about at Yale years ago. It's not there. Do you see exuberance in the NASDAQ?
No, look, I'm sure there's a stock here or there, yes. But, if you look to your point, big picture, this is not tech bubble type valuations, right? This is not, tech bubble type over your skis. This is a small number of companies generating a massive amount of earnings growth that are getting rewarded for it. So, are we above average valuation? Yes. I think if you looked at the S&P 500, you'd say you're probably maybe even upper quartile, upper decile. But, there's still room to expand, I think, if the economy holds in and we continue to print the type of earnings growth we are.
Stuart, I just got in my inbox, from Torsten Slok, our good friend over at Apollo Global Management. He's just basically calling out kind of what we know, but he's putting some numbers on it, which is, boy, the big cap stocks are just really richly valued. Small cap stocks, relatively cheap here. But I'm not sure I rotate out of the big caps and try to look for value here. How do you guys think of it when you talk to your clients? I mean, I think I just kind of own the big caps and go to the Jersey Shore and wait for September.
Look, we liked the broadening theme to start off the year because we actually thought earnings growth was going to broaden out. I think that's worked probably for a total of 4 weeks this year. Yep. Where the broadening trade has kind of worked. Why is small cap not working? I think it's because that's the part of the market that's most susceptible if you get a recession and is most susceptible to kind of higher for longer.
Right. Yep.
So people have been very cautious, to get into that space. And look, large cap is big earnings, introducing dividends, et cetera.
The strange word profit. Megden Desai at LSE, it's his most important word. Profit. Let's bring it over to something bow tie like free cash flow. Do you see margin compression or the gloom of a lesser free cash flow out there for, say, 30% of the universe well-run companies?
No, not yet. And I think if you were to identify the one fundamental risk to equities this year, it was going to be, what does the margin outlook look like, right? If you look at the past 4 to 6 quarters, you've had very high nominal GDP growth, and companies were able to protect
what do your
margin.
Security analysts, not you, what do your security analysts at Citigroup say to that?
Look, I think for now they're comfortable with the margin outlook. Scott Cronert, who's our U.S. equity strategist, about $245 S&P earnings.
I knew when he had a real job. Being sales manager for the West Coast.
Now he's got 3 real jobs, so
yeah, okay.
He's even more popular. But like he was high end of the street for a while on EPS, basically on this logic, Tom, and he remains there. So they're of the view that it is still a relatively robust fundamental environment for U.S. corporates.
What is owning 25 Delta calls on either the SPX or IWM? What does that mean?
It just means you own some out of the money upside in U.S. equities, and basically we don't have very many rules of thumb, but for a while you could pay less than the 10 implied volatility on that S&P 500 call option, which is just a really attractive entry to kind of rent to.
Okay, so is that like betting on the Edmonton Oilers?
Yeah, I guess it is.
It's like equivalent to saying the Oilers can win one.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, win one. Yes, win one. Maybe not the whole series, but
folks,
get a game.
Go to Bloomberg, type in your stock, NVDA or NASDAQ index, whatever, OVDV, and that will give you the delta and the gamma. It's got all the volatility there.
All right.
XYZ. Good morning, Bruto de Pierre, and the late Peter Carr, who put that together for us. You can sell terminals with OVDV.
You're darn right you can. Yep.
I mean, you just, I have no idea what I'm looking at. I'm looking at Swissy Hungarian forint, and you throw up an OVD volatility surface, and it's like, whoa, very cool. Stuart Kaiser, honored. Come back when the market goes down. He's with Citigroup, I should say, head of U.S. equity trading strategy as well. Paul, with all these distractions, G7 meeting, AMH is going to be with us. Forget about it.
I know.
It's a bull market. We're not talking about it. And I don't hear taxi cab drivers talking about it.
I don't know. I mean, we've, again, 13% on your S&P 500 here today, as Stuart was just saying, and Torsten Slok was putting on a note today. Really concentrated on some of those big cap tech names, but, I don't know. Where does
it's like lemmings off a cliff now. Everybody's got to do a 10-for-1 stock split.
Yes, exactly.
Broadcom 10-for-1 stock split. Coming up, I think Lisa Mateo will stay around for the hour.
Yeah.
From New York City on YouTube, search Bloomberg Podcasts. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures mixed. Traders weighed yesterday's softer U.S. inflation print against the Fed's more hawkish tone on interest rates. PPI data later. Well, that could offer some more signals. We shall see. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.6%. Dow futures down 0.2%. S&P futures up 0.1%. The 2-year yield 4.76%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.32%, and that is little changed as well. Few companies making news. We'll start with Sony Pictures. The Wall Street Journal reporting it's acquired dine-in theater chain Alamo Drafthouse Cinema. And we'll get over to Disney. Those shares little change. The New York Times reporting Disney and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis have reached an agreement, and that clears the way for $17 billion in planned development at Walt Disney World. Virgin Galactic, their board approved a 1-for-20 reverse split of the company's common stock. Those shares down more than 8%. As for earnings after the bell, we'll hear from Adobe. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. We're talking bull market here. We just had Stuart Kaiser in. I was mentioning Ben Laidler earlier. These are people that were courageous to get on board. We're going to bring somebody in now, but I'm going to digress up front with a major topic This is for all of you across this nation who are certain something's wrong in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. Joining us now, John Stolfus of OPCO. We're going to talk about a bull market. John, I think they've ruined the new Martin guitars with all the scalloping and the light bracing. I picked up a John Mayer Martin, and I'm like, this isn't a Martin. Am I right?
Well, you know, I go after the custom shop guitars from there. So I've got a D18 Golden Era that's signed by
Yeah,
Martin.
and it doesn't have scallop bracing. It's got traditional bracing, right?
Well, you know, it has traditional because it's mimicking something like 1941, 1942. And it's terrific. I think it actually is scallop breast. Wasn't that the originals?
That's the original scallop.
Yeah.
Or doing it.
If it's a custom shop, you get the.
But Neil Young's 1968, 69, D45s.
Oh, no.
Those weren't scalloped,
No,
and they
they
got
look-
that old Martin sound.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I can tell you this: I've owned a D28 that I bought in the probably about 1982 from Manny's when it was still in business.
Yeah.
Great guitar. And later on, I bought a D28 that was a Brazilian rosewood from the factory, a reproduction.
Oh.
And I tell you the truth, the D18 with Indian rosewood from the 80s was a better guitar.
That's great. Oh, here's an email. Mike from Bedford says, Sweeney, save the block. Get back on the markets.
Exactly.
Thanks to that, Mike. Paul, let's talk markets with John Stolfus.
John Stolfus, Chief Investment Strategist at Oppenheimer, joins us here. In his day job, he actually pays attention to the stock market here. John, what did you take away from yesterday from the CPI print and then more notably kind of what we heard from Fed Chairman Jay Powell?
Well, the CPI print was a nice relief from what we'd been seeing in the prior month, and what was it? It was January, February, and March were all elevated,
Yep.
And then for May we got a real relief, and the prior month had been a little bit of relief, as I recall as well. The rest of it, though, when it came to the Fed, we weren't surprised at all. From the beginning of this year, we were looking for 1 or 2 cuts when the Fed was saying intimating three cuts.
Okay.
So not much of a surprise.
So, I guess the feeling here is that, the markets rallied yesterday. We got a little bit of a mixed futures here today. What are you telling your clients these days about kind of what they should expect over the next 6 to 12 months in terms of returns?
Paul, we tell people first thing, we are at a period of transition related to monetary policy. As you know, I've been in this business for 41 years,
Yes.
So when I came in, it was Volcker's second term. So I've been through quite a few of these. And it's just, you have to be patient, and you have to right-size expectations, know what you own, why you own it, and recognize where you have conviction and where you want to do review positions to perhaps replace something that isn't performing or hold something and have more patience.
A bull market, how do you emotionally handle it? I believe, I'm not sure, but you were the first person, even before Ed Yardeni, Ralph Engelport, and other giants, to say 5,400. We're here. How do you frame out the courage to stay in the market, to get out, dare I say, can you whisper 5,800?
I think what it was is just we were looking at trends related to both secular trends as well as cyclical trends, but on top of that, we were looking at the Federal Reserve, which we think Powell's Federal Reserve, even though it was behind the curve in 2022, has been quick to really improve in terms of its positioning, in terms of monetary policy, and we think the transparency of the Fed is very pro-market.
Yeah, but
really.
have you written yet about 5,800 or SPX 6,000?
Not yet. And
We're waiting. Let's make some news here. Okay. Forget Martin guitars. Do you believe in SPX 6,000?
Well, 5,500 will be good for us until the market close at or above it. We have a discipline in our shop, which
so is that by the end of the month?
It could be very soon. It could be very soon. And then we would consider what we need to do. But we do see this as a great period in terms of resilience remains the proactive word here. It's whether it's related to business, the consumer, or job growth, even as the economy slows after, it's 11 hikes and now 8 pauses. The data shows remarkable resilience, and not everything resilient, but enough resilience to have the positives offset the negatives that still appear, because life is real and it's never perfect.
You know, Torsten Slok, our good friend over at Apollo, came out with a note this morning that just said, just kind of highlighting the concentration of performance in the stock market on these big companies, small caps kind of being left behind here. What do you tell clients about, I don't know, the breadth of the market or the lack of breadth in this market, and how should we be concerned about that?
Well, I would say one thing, the breadth has been at least giving us indication that it's improving. If we look at the fourth quarter of last year, when the smalls and the mids, as I recall, outperformed the large caps, and that was done because the market was beginning to believe that we were going to have more rate cuts than we actually will have this year. But that gave us sort of a preview of what's to come, we believe. And we do like the smalls and the mids. The valuations are good. There are concerns within it at these levels in terms of interest rates. But as interest rates come down, we're big believers that it's very likely to see those really run very nicely.
Do you securities research analysts, I asked this of Stuart Kaiser at Citigroup, does OpCo Securities Research say we'll see margin resilience, or part of your bull market call is maybe more of a struggle?
I think that the margin resilience thematic is running through much of our research. Our analysts do not take direction from me, but they most certainly, many of them, read us and give us a thumbs up.
That's great, Paul, because at most houses they're not on speaking terms.
Exactly.
Yeah, we actually got along with people.
Exactly. So, how about valuation here? I mean, when I look at the valuation for this market, do I get concerned at a 21 and change multiple, or do I strip out some of those big cap names and look at the S&P 493 or whatever?
Well, I think the thing is especially related to the big tech stocks. The reality is they're driving things right now. The AI is something that will likely benefit all 11 sectors, not just technology but it has to do with increasing efficiencies. Managements in all 11 sectors today over the last 15, 16 years have come through a lot of tough times, just like the people at the Fed. Experience has its value. It's and context, and we think that's going to be a help.
Quickly, is it 1999? I got a lot of gloom people going, OMG, bubble.
I remember 1999 distinctly. I was on the other end of it. I was at another firm. I was head of, it was manager of international equity marketing. We were looking at stocks from privatizations. It was Coke, smokes, and soaps kind of stuff internationally, steel companies and things like that. Very little coverage, little exposure to tech. But the firm that I was with had a lot of exposure to tech. Eventually, they moved us into a group that was analyzing S&P 500 sectors to build strategies to help people diversify out of that tech exposure. This is very different. That was a primitive era. There were little, you remember the modems that used to plug into the wall and they'd go,
Yep.
And this is, tech today is deeply embedded in the lives of both business and the consumer. We're all on the upgrade cycle, as those of us of a certain phone that you're holding up know.
John, on YouTube, live chat, Logan says Taylor guitars are better than Martin.
Oh, I'm afraid that what is it? It's everybody has their opinion, and we respect that. But
there we go.
I like Martins and Fenders and Gibsons.
Okay. You can come back. John Stolfus, thank you so much. They're on the parsing of Brazilian and Indian rose with D28s from another time and place. Michael Barr's going, what in God's name is he talking about? With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The G7 summit has opened in Italy. Premier Giorgia Meloni, in her opening remarks, likened the bloc of industrial nations to their olive trees with strong roots and branches pointing toward the future. Negotiators reached an agreement hours before the official opening of the summit on a U.S. proposal to back a $50 billion loan to Ukraine using frozen Russian assets as collateral. Heavy rain soaked southern Florida yesterday, causing dangerous flooding that blocked roads and delayed travel. Dania Beach received about a foot of rain, according to Mayor A.J. Ryan. He says the city has drainage improvement projects planned.
I've definitely seen residents in kayaks and rafts trying to help other residents and getting outside and assisting others. So that's really a great thing to see.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis declared a state of emergency in at least 5 counties. House Republicans voted to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. It was for refusing to turn over audio recordings of President Biden's interview with the special counsel during the classified documents investigation. The transcripts of that interview have already been made public, and the special counsel declined to prosecute. Republican James Comer of Kentucky explained why he was seeking the contempt charge against Garland.
The House of Representatives cannot serve as a necessary check on the presidency if the executive branch is free to ignore the House's subpoenas.
However, Democrat Jamie Raskin said the effort was the latest in a series of unfounded Republican attacks on the Biden administration.
Holding the Attorney General of the United States in contempt is one more useful distraction from the complete and devastating implosion of the Biden impeachment probe, which of course was the #1 priority of these talented leaders.
The vote was mostly along party lines. Finally, round 1 of the U.S. Open is underway at Pinehurst. Dynamo Scotty Scheffler goes off after 1 p.m. Tiger Woods just teed off. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Paul, we created a firestorm. Constance Hunter was with us yesterday.
Yep.
And she's emailing me in on 000. Like for women, the D is like it's like a big guitar.
Yeah.
And she's emailing in on 000 Martins.
Really?
Yeah. I mean,
shocking.
She's got one like Janice Ian had years ago. I mean, Constance is huge. I mean, I don't know. What else to say?
All right.
There it is.
I learned a lot about guitars.
There's the 028, the antique thing, and
Yep.
it's a Constance. Thanks for listening.
How many guitars do you own?
Don't go there. And also, of course, the rule of thumb at home is when you talk about the guitars with Mrs. Keene, you move the decimal point.
Okay.
You move. How much did that cost? That was $128.
There you go.
It works out.
Yep.
I got to get rid of them. I got too many.
What do the neighbors say? Do they like the music? Can
No,
they hear
we're
it?
very. We have a thing from Universal Audio which syncs the volume. It really works. It's a transformer. I can't remember what they call it now. It's called an aux. If you have an aux, you don't ruin the relationship with the neighbors.
There you go.
But it's Saturday.
Better than the drums.
Oh my
Oh
gosh.
yeah, we have
I have
the
a neighbor
drums.
across the street who does the
Oh,
drums.
is that right?
Ooh.
Afterthought has the drums. They'll be going to college with her. Futures up 6, red and green on the screen, a VIX 12.22. It is a bull market. That's our theme this morning. PPI in less than an hour. NASDAQ up 0.6%. On YouTube, on Apple CarPlay, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lise Mateo. We have futures mixed after Federal Reserve officials, they dial back their expectations to only one rate cut this year, but kept the door open for more. We have S&P futures up 0.1%, Dow futures down 0.3%, NASDAQ futures down 0.6%. The two-year yield 4.75%, the yield on the 10-year 4.31%. Over to the Washington Post, it says robo-taxi operator Waymo issuing a software fix after one of its autonomous vehicles crashed into a telephone pole. Waymo, owned by Google's parent company Alphabet, those shares down 0.5%. Honda said it's going to launch a long-awaited commercial electric van in October with the starting price of just over $15,000. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Was Ludlow in the car? First thing you're thinking about.
Yeah, exactly.
He's driving around California driver's list or whatever.
I know.
We're
going to find him on the, I don't know where we're going to find him. It's going to be ugly.
I don't know. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. We're brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers, they charge dollar margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83%. Rates subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare. Anne-Marie's finishing up lunch in Puglia, Italy. We'll get to her in a moment here. Phil Orlando.
Prosecco.
Right now. And we got a whole series of equity optimists. Phil Orlando, decades of experience at Federated, is hardwired be in the market. Phil Orlando, how do you participate now after a bull market from December of 2018?
So, first of all, Tom, thank you very much for having me back on this morning. As you know, you've spoken to Steve Auth, Steve Chevron, my other colleagues. We're, longer-term bulls. We've got this 6,000 S&P 500 target looking out into next year. But we are concerned about the divergence we've seen in the market given the dramatic outperformance of the, Mag 7 names over the course of the last 18 to 24 months at the expense of the forgotten 493. So our view has been that there will be a reversion to the mean, a broadening out of this rally, and with some of the froth from some of the growth and technology names sort of spreading the love, if you will, into domestic large cap value, small cap growth, international, the areas that have been left for dead as we experience what we think will be some increased volatility and chop over the course of the next couple of months.
So, Phil, I've, like a lot of other folks, have been thinking about the broadening out of this market and getting some better breadth out there. I thought I saw a little bit of it in the fourth quarter last year, but it feels like it's just not there. And I have a hard time, getting out of the Mag 7 or the big cap growth stocks, however you want to define it, and trying to look for value otherwhere. I feel like I'm going to get left behind here. Do you think we're actually going to see that this year?
Well, that's our call, and you're right. We share your frustration. The S&P 500 in the first, 5.5 months of the year is up, in the low teens, 12, 13%. And there's a dramatic outperformance of a very narrow group of stocks led by NVIDIA. Now, not to suggest that NVIDIA is not a great company and that, AI is not a great trend longer term, but, Tom talked about my decades of experience. I'm to some degree tortured by my recollection of what occurred to the growth and technology names going into, the calendar changeover with the Y2K bubble.
Right.
Back in 1999. Now, we solved the problem. The internet technology was absolutely part of the solution, but we were over-optimistic, and there was a reversion to the mean, a payback that occurred once, we got past the crisis. I just think that with a lot of these stocks selling at very generous valuation levels, and with the sectors that I mentioned before, value, small cap growth, international, selling 30, 40, 50% below what would represent normal valuation for them. If we do get some chop over the summer, which is our forecast, that there will be this broadening out of the rally, there will be this reversion to the mean, and I think playing defense for the next quarter or two, at least going into the election, isn't a bad strategy.
Yep. Hey, Phil, how do you feel about valuation here? I mean, it's tough to kind of get a good call here because if you look at the S&P as a monolith, it's pretty expensive, I would argue. But I guess if you pull out some of those big tech names, the valuation gets a little bit more palatable. How do you guys think about that?
Well, that's exactly right, Paul. That the valuation for the Mag 7 is sort of masking the overall valuation of the S&P 500. So you look at benchmark 10-year Treasury yields, and that's an important variable for us in terms of valuation. You've got yields that have rallied now from 470 to 430 over the course of the last couple of months. But you look at that 430 yield, and that would suggest that a price earnings ratio for the S&P 500, 17.5, 18 times earnings seemed reasonable. We're up in that 20 to 21 times forward multiple. So in our view, stocks are probably 5 to 10% ahead of where they need to be. They're looking through a lot of the confusion right now.
Phil, one final question. We got to go to Anne-Marie Horton in Puglia, Italy, with the G7 meeting. Phil Orlando, do you care about the linkage of politics into what you do with your money if you have a 3-year or 5-year hold, or do you just ignore Anne-Marie Horton's world?
If your time horizon is 3 to 5 years, you ignore it, Tom. Stocks go up and to the right, regardless of who's in the White House. Near term, you want to be tactical. Longer term, the American economy is going to do fine.
Phil, thank you so much. Our regards to Steve Alth, who said, shut up and be in the market as well. Phil Orlando with Federated. It's great to have him on. We now go, and somebody said, where is Puglia? And I said, it's where the Ferro family's from.
Oh,
this is the mother country of John Ferro.
That explains a lot.
It's like a lot of Italy. It's between Rome and Sicily, and nobody's ever been there except Puglia is exploding. It's on the water. It's on the water on the other side, looking out at the Adriatic, like the Venetians go by on their way to Istanbul. Joining us now, I mean, it's a tough gig she's got going here. Anne-Marie Horton with us. Anne-Marie, as you know, one of the great advisors to Bloomberg Surveillance is Ed Duffner, with years of experience and just huge historical perspective. And Ed Duffner nailed it this morning when he said the photo shoot that they had looked like the Potsdam Conference of 1945, where Truman had replaced FDR and Churchill was gone in the middle of the conference for Clement Attlee. What a lineup today. Kohl, crushed. Macron hasn't slept in a week. Trudeau, I don't know what's going on. There's the president with all of his, upset. And then they finish off with Mr. Sunak, the prime minister, who left D-Day early. Is this the ugliest G7 you've ever seen, Anne-Marie Horton?
Well, certainly a lot of those leaders you just mentioned are dealing with a lot of criticism back home, and some of them walking into this G7 still licking their wounds from the European parliamentary elections, notably Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the UK, Tom, not only did he leave D-Day early, but potentially he'll be out of a job in 3 weeks' time. So you have a lot of parochial politics painting the backdrop and the picture of this G7. I was struck by what Jake Sullivan said to a few of us reporters this morning, that Biden is walking into his 4th G7 with these nations more unified in modern memory than most other G7s. And I'm sitting there scratching my head saying maybe they're unified amongst the table around each other, but they certainly are walking in without the conviction and the backing of their own electorate. They are dealing with serious problems at home, except for one person, of course, and that's Giorgia Meloni. This is an individual who many that she's standing next to doubted her from the beginning. She's been able to forge a very close bond with Joe Biden and the Biden administration. She rules on the international stage, moderate, as a centrist, potentially at home. Some will say her rhetoric is very far right, but internationally she's come into line. And whether you like her or not, opponents in Italy, left-leaning civil servants in Italy, what they say is, ma è brava, but she's good.
Yeah, Paul,
and she is the one here that they're coming to almost, coronate. It's a coronation of a new European leader.
And what's really important here, Paul, is the Denelli Hotel in Venice. It's in Ripley. It's taken Marriott, Anthony Capiano lost it, and it's going to be a new Four Seasons hotel.
Oh.
That's been Maloney's great achievement, is moving the Denelli over to Four Seasons. Continue.
Anne-Marie, what's the definition of success for President Biden at this meeting here this week?
I think the definition for success is something that, and we broke this news earlier this morning, part of my reporting along with my colleagues Alberto and Victoria, is that they were able to get over the finish line, being able to tap in the future interest payments of these immobilized, frozen Russian assets. The Europeans have agreed that they would give Ukraine the interest of the current assets, $200 billion worth, mostly sitting in Europe. But that's only about $3 to $6 billion a year. The United States was keen on front-loading that money. And this is important because it kind of election-proofs if you have concerns about maybe what a future U.S. president might do, what a future UK prime minister might look like. If all of these individuals are potentially either this is their last G7 or you think potentially some of them, this is a group of lame ducks, $50 billion they're going to give to Ukraine by the end of the year. So this is what the Biden administration has been working on in terms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and trying to support Ukraine. They've been working on this for months, and they were able to get over the finish line today.
I mean, on radio you can't see, but Paul, come on, Anne-Marie looks like out of central casting for Ripley, right?
Exactly.
I mean, she looks like she's on the Amalfi Coast. Anne-Marie Horton, thank you so much, reporting from a G7 meeting. Really interesting to see.
No, Tom, Puglia is better than the Amalfi Coast. Puglia is better than the Amalfi Coast. And by the way, a lot of people have been visiting Puglia for a few years, not just John Farrar.
Here we go. It's a Chamber of Commerce ad for Puglia. Thank you. Anne-Marie Horton, safe travels as well. Important G7 meetings. Paul, let's get back to economics, finance, and investment. I mean, what do? Watch the NASDAQ today, up 0.6% futures?
Yeah, we got kind of mixed futures out there, Tom, here. We got the S&P pretty much unchanged, up a couple of points. The Dow off 125 points. But the NASDAQ, as you mentioned, Tom, up 0.6%, 111 points. We're at 19,600 on your NASDAQ here. Yields coming in just a little bit, Tom. We got the 2-year 4.75% and the 10-year 4.31%.
Fascinating. We got important economic data here in 30 minutes. You're going to want to stay with us for that. On Apple CarPlay, on Android, the Bloomberg Business app, it's free. And just as importantly, on YouTube, we're just humbled by the build-out of YouTube. This is a really determined project that we're doing. We brought in an outside consultant, Sparta Consultant, to help us with this. And, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Search for Bloomberg Podcast. You get there. Do you know you get the Tim and Carol show in the afternoon?
Yes, you do.
You get it all. And you guys are on too.
I think we are.
Alex and Paul are on. It's
absolutely.
Just like, I really want to emphasize this. It's 24/7. It's a real commitment on the part of Bloomberg to this new world we're all living with, which is YouTube. That's all there is to it. Please stay with us. Again, on equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, on currencies, dollar strength off the weakness yesterday. I'm watching Euro Yen rounded up 170. Little tension in Japan. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation is still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news. Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more. The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
It's a bull market. Paul Sweeney says so. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. Good morning, everyone. Here are the levels, 38,700 on the Dow, lagging a little bit. 5421 SPX and NASDAQ 100 won't quit, 19,000. I'm not on the 20,000 watch, but Paul, NASDAQ up 0.6% this morning.
Yeah, I keep an eye on NASDAQ. Again, some of the reemergence of some of those big high-tech names. Apple, Tom, has been such incredible shareholder value just over the past couple of months. So it's just been a nice move there. They're getting some.
Yeah,
of the
you
AI.
were laughing at me when I said I'm in the triple leveraged all cash fund in April.
Yep. Should have
been. It's a moonshot.
Backing up the truck to Apple was a good trade back in the day. How long can that stock ever lag some of its tech peers?
There's been some good work on that.
Yeah.
I don't have an opinion on that, but there's been some good work recently on it lags and then
it does
somehow comes back.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Lots to talk about this one. I want to sell this. This is important. In the 9 o'clock hour at the end is the academic economist that the academic economists pay attention to. His name is Brad Setzer. I'm not going to go into it now. We got to get the show going. But the answer is this guy is who everybody listens to. He's a young Turk of American economics, somewhat equivalent, I'd say, to Justin Wolfers. Brad Setzer with us in the 9 o'clock hour. Bloomberg Surveillance brought to you by Cohn Resnick. Advisory Assurance Tax. Cohn Resnick can help you improve business resilience through a comprehensive risk management solution. Visit cohnresnick.com. We're on YouTube, we're on Android, we're on Apple CarPlay, as Paul says, Apple lifts, with our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Futures right now, they are mixed, and this is a day after stocks surged to record highs on Wall Street. S&P 500 topped 5,400 for the first time in its history. It was also the same day the Fed announced no change to its benchmark interest rates. Today, we have more economic data on tap. We have initial jobless claims for last week, also the producer price index for May. That comes out in about a half hour from now. Let's get to the numbers. So we have the S&P futures up 0.1%, Dow futures down 0.2%. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.6%. Yeah, tech-heavy NASDAQ. Help given that boost is Broadcom. Their shares up 14%. It reported quarterly results and an annual forecast topped estimates. And yes, it also announced a 10-for-1 stock split. We also have news about Alphabet's Google. It's partnered with a Berkshire Hathaway-backed Nevada utility and a geothermal energy startup. It's going to run data centers on electricity derived from the Earth's own heat. Shares down nearly 0.5%. And sticking with tech, Bloomberg reporting OpenAI on pace for $3.4 billion of annual revenue. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. What's great about our next guest, Paul, is he just sends in these notes. Tom, shut up and ask me about this. Exactly. This is what I want to talk about.
That's how it works.
Rude. Lachlan Achathan joins us with ECRI, Economic Cycle Research Institute. Love that work. Full disclosure, my mother had religion for Jeffrey Moore years ago, and it was at the dining room table. She'd sit there with a lark in her hands and a Manhattan and go, let's read ECRI. And away we went. You said, hey, stupid, I want to link in all that's going on in America over to the ECB, where they cut interest rates, but inflation's going up. I agree. It's odd.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's a turn of a phrase, right? The hawkish cut. In this day and age, you have to spin it somehow.
Right.
Big picture, we talked about a couple of months ago. We talked about an international inflation cycle bottoming and turning up globally, and usually, when you look at cycles over a long period of time, and inflation cycles in particular, you see the U.S. doesn't really delink from that. Now, again, looking around the world, everybody abroad is kind of bottoming in the twos somewhere, and we seem to be stuck in the threes, right? The low threes. We're supposed to get to two, but we seem kind of stuck. And when we look at the U.S., where I think there's a close relationship, the common theme we're seeing everywhere is this goods price inflation. We talked about it last month when we were here, and I picked a spot out of what Powell said in the press conference yesterday. Quote, "There's been a surprising increase in import prices on goods, which is kind of hard to understand." Now, in the context of this cycle stuff we've been talking about, not at all. This is kind of par for the course. And so I don't think it's over, right? I think that's the key thing. Cyclical things tend to turn and go for a while. And my expectation is that this will be part of the story that we'll read about over the summer. You're seeing, for example, shipping prices going up anecdotally, right?
Okay.
So that kind of thing. As activity rises, that'll be less of a disinflationary impulse.
So talk to me about this 2% inflation number. I never heard about it until a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's become a thing. And
Yeah.
what's wrong with 3%? What's wrong with 2.5%?
Sure.
As just a run rate inflation for a vibrant economy. I'm not sure why the Fed is so focused on that. What's the history there?
Yeah, so I think the inflation targeting goes way back to maybe the Bank of New Zealand in the 90s. and there was some work done where this was a suggestion and that we could target it. We could find a number and go to it, right? Which is nice if the world were neat and didn't work in messy ways. But of course, it's not. It's a kind of a simplified reality, these models. And the Fed, I think it might have been Bernanke who kind of brought some of the targeting out to the forefront with some more communications, increased communications and things like that the Fed was doing. And so here we are with this target, okay? And the Fed's institutional credibility is around inflation fighting. Yep. And they've got some egg on their face, right? Yep. and so they even though they may literally not get to 2, they can't say that they're going to give up on 2.
Well, I saw, what was the phrase? I made fun of the phrase yesterday. I slept under the desk here, folks, last night after the Fed show. But multiple further progress. What in God's name is that? And Lachman, to your very important insight, the market at 8:30 yesterday had a moonshot off a vector of disinflation.
Sure.
Translate from your leading indicators and your cycle research where that vector is right now in inflation.
Okay, so I think internationally it's already vectoring to the upside. Coincident inflation's probably bottomed and is moving to the upside. I think in the U.S. we're in the vicinity of it doing that, switching direction.
It hasn't switched directions yet.
I don't think it's switched yet, but look where we are, and we're talking about switching above 3 instead of at 2, as Paul just said. Okay, now this becomes interesting because if you remember back to cycles of inflation in earlier decades, you don't want higher lows.
Let me get to the punchline. What does it do to Paul Sweeney's 401k? Excuse me, Lisa. Sweeney has a 501k. What's it do to his NVIDIA stacked 501k?
Okay, all right. It gets complicated, right? Because the growth the growth is going up. Growth is improving. You've got a global industrial upturn. That's a kind of a goods and inflation floor. So financial assets can inflate under certain circumstances. As long as you don't have a hard landing and earnings don't get crushed, financial assets can still inflate. You just have a higher low on where inflation is going in this cycle. That's what it looks like right now. So,
is it surprising that maybe the Fed is behind the ECB the Bank of Canada? I mean, doesn't the Fed usually lead?
Well, let's take another step back, another big step back. Look at the COVID response. It was big in the U.S. It wasn't as big elsewhere. I'm totally oversimplifying.
Yep.
And so that's money. That's a thing.
Yep.
And it may still be contributing to things. I mean, wages are still sticky. I think Powell called that out. The services stuff has always been inflation has always been there. The hope has been that this nice goods disinflation that we had from the global industrial downturn was assumed. We could bank on it. And I think the cyclical news is, no, it's going the other way.
So, I mean, I guess for this Fed, I mean, you could look at this Fed and say, there's no reason for them to rush out.
Yeah, they're on hold. I mean, they're on hold. They have to say what they say. There's a lot of politics going on.
December, you think is the best bet, maybe?
Sure. I don't think there's a rush here. I think I think this sticky, look, we've been saying sticky and all this stuff on the better part of a year. And there's nothing that's taking us off of that call. So it would take a hard landing, and I think our hard landing risk that we saw earlier has totally dissipated. It's a K-shaped economy.
Yep.
The haves are doing well. The have-nots
I don't know what you do about that.
Getting crushed. When you add it up, there's growth.
But what kind of growth is it? This has been great. Don't be a stranger and let us know when the vector shifts on inflation. Lisa wants to know.
Totally.
Lachman, thank you so much. With the the Economic Cycle Research Institute, ECRI, ECRI as well. The NASDAQ up 0.6%, the VIX 12.17. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. A group of 7 summit has opened in Italy. Premier Giorgia Meloni has welcomed the G7 leaders and formally opened their closed-door talks today. Negotiators reached an agreement hours before the official opening of the summit on a U.S. proposal to back a $50 billion loan to Ukraine using frozen Russian assets as collateral. Growing support for Ukraine despite threats from Vladimir Putin over the U.S. green-lighting attacks on Russian targets near Ukraine's border. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin meeting with NATO defense ministers in Brussels this morning.
As we gather this morning, Ukraine's forces are in a tough fight. In Kharkiv and elsewhere, the Kremlin continues to intensify its bombardment of Ukraine's cities and civilians.
Secretary Austin says that Sweden, Spain, and Belgium are joining the U.S. in providing billions of dollars in additional military support for Ukraine. Donald Trump will return to Capitol Hill today to discuss what another Trump presidency would look like. Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons reports.
Former President Trump has had differences with Republicans in the past, but many are now standing staunchly behind him. Former Congressman Kevin Brady now works with the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. He predicts during today's meeting they'll discuss extending Trump's 2017 tax cuts that expire next year, despite the price tag.
Lawmakers, as they extend the tax cuts, will also extend the reforms that help pay for it. That won't cover all of it. It's a good, solid step.
According to the Washington Post, one lawmaker predicted chaos while another thought it would be morale building. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
Argentina President Javier Milei's economic reform package won a key victory when the Senate approved his omnibus bill today. However, an additional income tax legislation was rejected following debate marred by violent protests that broke out earlier in front of Congress. Finally, round 1 of the U.S. Open is underway. Tiger Woods, one of the early golfers, he's at 1 under right now. Nice. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it. Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Count the days, including this June 13th. Do you know today's one of my offspring's birthday?
Really?
I don't know which, but
yes, one of them. You know it's out there.
It's a birthday today. Let's count the working days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 days to window dress.
Oh.
Are you kidding me now? You're running a portfolio.
Yep.
You're light on the Magnificent 42.
Oh, boy.
The window dressing, this could be like we've never seen.
I mean, the SPX is up 13.65% here. And if you're not in some of those, we said this last year, and it's still true this year. Yeah. If you're not in some of those names, boy, you got to
Is this part of the Apple moonshot? I think so.
I think, yeah. I mean, it was a source of funds for a while. Now you're buying it.
OMG, I got to publish June 30th. Buy Apple. Good morning from New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got red and green on the screen, and this is after reports showed U.S. core consumer price index fell to the lowest in more than 3 years, and the Fed pointed to just one interest rate cut this year instead of 3. So we have S&P futures up 0.2%, Dow futures down 0.1%, and NASDAQ futures up 0.7%. The 2-year yield 4.75%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.31%, and that is little change. We'll head over to Tesla, where shares are up 6% ahead of its shareholder meeting today. Elon Musk says 2 key proposals to re-ratify his $56 billion pay package and to move Tesla's legal home to Texas, well, they appear to be on the way to passing. And we have news from JPMorgan Chase. Its asset management arm raised more than $500 million for a biotech venture capital fund that will bet on, you guessed it, weight loss drugs. Yes, and from weight loss drugs to a hot dog eating contest. Bear with
nice
me.
security.
Bear with
that
me
was
here.
good.
I know you're like, where's she going with this? But Netflix says it's going to air its own live competition on Labor Day, not 4th of July, featuring the one and only Joey Chestnut.
Nice
he was
move.
actually banned from Nathan's on Coney Island for signing a deal with Impossible Foods. Who knew? That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and
We
Paul.
covered all. For those of you worldwide, for those of you in Mexico or Montreal or Montevideo, I mean, Paul, this is a big
hot dog eating
deal.
thing is big.
It's big in New York.
Big competition. Coney Island.
Everybody should
July
go
4th.
Coney Island at least once.
Oh,
Gotta
yeah,
go
absolutely. It's a must go.
You get on the route.
You can hop on the subway
You sit there and
and
have a
just shoot
beer.
out there.
You know, you're sitting at a table at Coney Island, and 2 guys at your table were all, they're like in all these great classic, CSI and there's some studs down there, to say the least. So what we're going to do, McKee, there was just a sighting of McKee. We're going to get to him in a moment after the festivities yesterday. Sonia Martin gives us a brief wrapped around yesterday, where the chairman gently said to one of the reporters, Yellen talks about the dollar. We're going to talk to Sonia Martin about the dollar right now with DZ Bank. Sonia, you believe in dollar resiliency, right? Why?
Well, I mean, when you look at the U.S. economy, it is still very robust. I mean, we have seen some signs of weakness, obviously not so much in the last labor market report, at least not when you look at the headlines. But, overall, I would say that, the U.S. is still fairly solid, on fairly solid footing. And, we are expecting rate cuts from the Fed, but, just 1, maybe 2 this year. We're betting on 1. So, the dollar, it definitely has some potential for some weakness here and there, but I think it would be going way too far to suggest that the dollar is coming to the point where we could look for more substantial depreciation.
Sonia, we've had a lot of news coming out of your part of the world over the past couple of days with the European election. Now we're focusing on the snap election in France. How does that impact your thoughts about the euro?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of news, and a lot of it hasn't been good news. The market has been really rattled by this result. I mean, it wasn't entirely unexpected, but I think, the fact that we now get a snap election in France has really, really created a lot of political uncertainty. And, what makes it really hard is it's very difficult to predict the outcome of this election. Right. The French have a very particular electoral system. So that creates uncertainty. And of course, there is the prospect that we're going to get what's called a cohabitation, where, we have Macron as president and Le Pen running the government. And of course, that is something that people are very concerned about.
In that kind of scenario, I can't imagine that bodes well for the euro. So how does the political situation in France kind of impact the European currency, generally speaking?
Well, we've already seen some reaction, obviously, earlier this week, Monday particularly, but also on Tuesday, there were rumors that Macron might step down, and that really created additional nervousness in the market. It's sort of wait and see. As I said, it's difficult to predict the outcome of the election. Should it become clear that Le Pen has a good chance of winning, I think we would probably see further significant downside for the euro on a very short term. The more interesting question is what happens after that, because obviously everyone is hoping that we're going to get a Meloni situation where we have an election victory for Le Pen, but then actually sort of in real life politics things will become less harsh.
Sonia, thank you for the briefing. We got to get you on before what is it, July 27? It's two. They have two votes.
They have two votes. I'm not.
It's June 30 and then July
30th.
7th. June 30 and then July 7th. Can we slot in Rich and Eric? Be sure that we get Sonia on here as we come up to these two important elections. With DZ Bank in Frankfurt, Sonia Martin. I mean, the way you know that it was stress last night with the Fed meeting is when somebody, a good friend of mine at the Delta Lounge, calls up and says, Tom, what do we do? McKee ordered a Boilermaker.
Yeah,
he's sitting there at the Delta Lounge with a shot of whiskey and a beer in his hand after what passed as a Fed press conference. Mike McKee, what is multiple further progress? What a joke.
It's what they want to see. Now, you can define that how you want. Basically, I think they just want to see inflation go down. They don't have a target for exactly how much, but if it continues to fall at least by 1/10 each month, then for 2, maybe 3 more months, then they're going to be able to go ahead and start cutting rates, or at least start.
But did you
saving.
come out of that press conference before your Boilermaker at the Delta Lounge? Did you come out of that with any clarity at all?
No, other than the fact that they're still committed to cutting rates at some point. But they're extremely divided over how many rate cuts. A plurality want 2, but the way we do things in the overreaction field is to pick a median, and so we get 1. And their criteria seem odd because they don't think the economy is going to change at all between now and the end of the year. So what is it exactly that you're going to make your decision on? And I think that's kind of what they wanted. They wanted people to just kind of stop worrying about the first one and just keep looking at the data.
Paul, you should have cut the press conference in half and played dead music the rest of the
rest
time.
of
It
the
would have been
time.
just as effective.
Mike, when I was kind of listening to this, I kind of felt like the Fed feels like they're orchestrating this perfectly, which is the data's pretty solid. There's no reason for us to rush into anything. And this whole waiting game, it's not so bad for the world. I mean, the stock market's up, the yields are coming in. I mean, the economy's still chugging along. This whole waiting for a rate cut, that's a pretty good strategy if I'm the Fed.
Yeah, they don't need to move. Yeah. So they are not feeling any pressure. They don't want to get it wrong. They don't want to have to then raise rates again if they've cut rates. And things are basically going their way. So why not just sit there and let it happen? The European Central Bank maybe got into a little bit of trouble because they promised they were going to cut rates and then maybe they didn't need to. So now they're trying to push back and say, don't expect anything more soon.
He's also our surveillance Lewis and Clark correspondent. Mike McKee, seriously here, at milepost 12.8 on Wyoming Route 22, the road slipped away. First thing I thought of was you.
Yeah.
What does that road do? I mean, you're out at different conferences on the 8-week sabbatical you take every summer. You know, it's like Rocky Mountain High. But this is devastating on that linkage of Idaho south into northern Wyoming.
Yeah, it is devastating for the Jackson Hole area because Jackson is very expensive to live in, except for Paul and his 501k. And a lot of the service workers, as many as 20% of the service workers live over across the mountainside, and it was a 30-minute drive every day back and forth for them to come in and be waiters, waitresses, ski lift attendants, and now you have to drive 90 minutes or more around, go south.
Describe
and then come
that
back
road
north.
for our international audience. Do you go through Jellystone Park?
No, you don't. This road goes directly west. It goes over Teton Pass. It's some people describe it as scary.
Yes, it's ridiculous.
It has a 10% grade at some points. I've never particularly worried about it, but I do worry when I see the big semis trying to go over that. But then I thought about how many times I've driven over that road, and it could have fallen on me, or I could have fallen with it. But it will not affect, and people have asked this, it will not affect the Fed's Jackson Hole conference because that's directly north of Jackson by about 30 miles. It goes a different direction.
I got 15 seconds. Have you ever been out there in your 8-week sabbatical and it snowed in late August?
No, not snowed in late August. Late August, we usually get forest fire smoke.
Yeah.
Surveillance Lewis and Clark correspondent Michael McKee getting ready for an 8-week sojourn at economic conference. Oh, we have no life.
No, I put a ticket in to carry his luggage on. We'll see how that goes.
We'll see. Futures up 13. Stay with us. From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We are just moments away from more economic data. Before we get to that, let's check in with futures right now. S&P futures up 0.2%. We have Dow futures down 0.1%, and we have Nasdaq futures up 0.7%. We'll take you over to the 2-year yield at 4.73%, and that is down 3 basis points. The 10-year yield 4.27%, and that's down 3 basis points. We have initial jobless claims coming in. The survey was for 225,000, coming in at 242,000. Now, when it comes to PPI, Tom, do you go final demand month to month, or do you go core PPI first?
I go, wow, huge market move. Wow. Lisa Mateo, thank you. so much. What we're going to do here, we're going to talk to Matt Luzzetti about the outrage at UCLA's in the Big Ten. We have to rip up the script because we've got market-moving economic news now. Finally, a jump in claims up to 242,000. I'm waiting for the revision off of 229. Yep. We'll see if that jumps up as well. It's going to be even more. And PPI just simply comes in softer across the board. And I don't even care which series they pick. Luzzetti keeps track of this. But NASDAQ up 0.9%. Green on the screen except for the Dow and the VIX. We're going to get an 11 handle. And where's the Sweeney 2-year yield right now? 4.68% in 7.
Still not bad.
Yeah, well, it's not bad. Our economic indicators with leadership from Commonwealth. Thank you, Commonwealth. The economic indicators brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about our consultative support in technology. Matt Luzzetti, I don't have a revision yet on weekly claims. We'll get it here in a moment. I'll interrupt when we get there. But come on, the disinflation vector is in place. We saw it yesterday at 8:30. We see it this morning at 8:30.
Yeah, I would highlight both data points. Initial jobless claims jumping up to 240,000 is an important data point. Now, there's volatility in the week-to-week data, but if that were to stick, that's
What's
an
your
important
4-week moving average on claims where it's a whole new world after all?
I think if you are 240 to 250,
really that tight.
That
Wow.
is usually the numbers that you would begin to think about. I mean, initial jobless claims, when they move up in a sustainable way, typically stick there. Now, there's volatility in the week-to-week data. We had a jump a few weeks back up to 230,000. You have to look at what's going on in the state level data, so I don't want to, without seeing all the details, it's hard to know. But if that sticks, that's an important data point because the labor market has been strong because layoffs have been low.
Right.
If that changes, it changes the picture of the labor market. I'm not saying this morning's data point did that, but it certainly could be important if it sticks.
Well, the Sweeney offspring are employed, so we're doing our part here. What'd you take out of the Federal Reserve's chairman's comments yesterday, and just kind of the data we saw?
Yeah, so yesterday's morning CPI was a great data point from their perspective. It showed a softening, 16 basis points month on month. It was good in a lot of the areas that they would want it to be good. Services inflation was softer. Rent and OER was a little bit disappointing. I was surprised that they only showed one rate cut for this year. Okay. Now it is our baseline that they only cut rates once.
So you think they're only once, and do we do that in December?
Okay. In December. But I was still surprised that they signaled that yesterday. I thought that they would want to maintain more actively optionality to cut rates before the meeting. Now, Chair Powell downplayed the signal from that dot plot, as he typically does. But at the same time, I don't think he was as dovish as he could have been. He talked very strongly about the economy, about the labor market, about wage growth being high.
Come on. You're at UCLA with a wonderful faculty there and all the heritage of Alan Meltzer being there. And come on, no textbook. Obsfeld, Rogoff, all the rest of them has multiple further progress in it. What a bunch of malarkey. I mean, I'm sorry. There's like 3 adverbs back to back. Who invented multiple further progress?
Look, the reality is we had 4 stronger prints to start this year. We did get 1 much better print. But the Fed, looking at the economy, the labor market report that we got on Friday, Atlanta Fed GDP tracking above 3% in Q2, is looking at an economy that does not urgently need
So then why doesn't he come out like in the old days and say, we don't know, we're data dependent, the market's got to pop, the economy's got to pop, the stock market's got to pop, we're going to wait instead of all this mumbo jumbo.
So I think he did. The problem is that they have the dot plot now. And so if you just took the press conference in isolation, he essentially said that. We are data dependent. We're making decisions on a meeting by meeting basis. We have to see how the inflation and labor market data come in. We think the economy is strong right now, so we don't urgently need to cut rates. Now, the issue is they have the dot plot. Greenspan did not have the dot plot, and so it's harder to get away from any calendar-based guidance.
Can you imagine Luzzetti and Folkerts, Landau, and Hooper in a room together talking about the dot plot?
Yeah, how exciting
They
would
probably
that
have to switch to German. They get so obsessed.
Riveting. All right, initial jobless claims today, again, as Tom mentioned, they came in at 242,000. Consensus was for 225,000, so a little bit higher than what we typically seen here was 229,000 last period. But I don't know. It seems like the consumer's in good shape. The consumer has a job. They're getting wage increases. They're spending money. How do you feel about the consumer these days?
So I think there's been a lot of questions about the consumer. You have kind of idiosyncratic reports from companies. You did have a weak consumer spending report if you look 2 weeks back. Now it comes off of consumer strength. But I would agree with you. There's this circularity between thinking about the labor market and the consumer. As long as the labor market remains resilient and strong and job gains are solid and wage growth is there, there's very little reason to think that the aggregate consumer weakens. Now, there is greater heterogeneity. You do have, at the lower end of the income distribution, there does seem to be some evidence of stress strains that are there. From my perspective, that's a little bit more returning to what the pre-COVID economy looked like than something that is signaling a worrying slowdown on behalf of the consumer.
Is inflation, we think about inflation because the Fed thinks about inflation here, and we think about a 2% inflation rate is kind of a target. Is that something this economy can get down to, or it just feels like we're kind of stuck here at this, I don't know, a high 2s or a 3% kind of inflation rate? Are we stuck there for a while, do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, this year, from a year-over-year rate, we will be stuck there. I mean,
Okay.
you have base effects that are difficult. Our inflation for core PC at the end of the year is 2.7, a little bit below what the Fed was. But as you look ahead to next year, I would expect shelter inflation is coming off. It does lag a bit, but that we can get closer to 2%. It's probably difficult to get into the low 2s without shelter inflation coming off more materially. But I think importantly for the Fed, they've been clear. They don't need to get down to 2% to begin to cut rates. They just need to have confidence that they're on the path to get there.
For our listeners or viewers on YouTube, what impacts their life with the first or even the second rate cut? What changes?
Look, the reality is these rate cuts are priced. So they are there in 2-year yields. They are there in 10-year yields. They are there in mortgage rates.
What about
and so you need surprises.
Lisa Mateo at Costco?
Yes.
I'm serious. What's it mean?
So I think in terms of Costco, it's actually the reverse causality, meaning if Costco is cutting prices, then the Fed can cut rates.
We go to economist Lisa Mateo right now. Lisa, is Costco cutting prices?
They are not. They do have some good sale items, but no, the prices haven't come
This
down
is
too
important.
much.
Sale items. There's going to be a lot more sale items.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the CPI report yesterday, there was reasonably broad-based deceleration. Look at the trim mean was weaker. The median has come down pretty materially. So you did have broad-based softening in yesterday's inflation report.
We're going to run the studio conversations when we're on break for all of you worldwide and nationwide. Some people say they're smarter than what we actually talk about. I walk in and all Luzzetti and Sweeney are talking about is UCLA gets $72 million for playing Rutgers in field hockey?
It's going to be crazy. So, I mean, Matt, I know you're a Villanova undergrad, but you got your PhD at UCLA.
Transatlantic.
But now, your UCLA is going to have to come all the way to the East Coast to play Big Ten?
It is wild. I mean, thinking about the Pac-10 or Pac-12 and that disbanding and
the whole Stanford UCLA thing's gone, right?
It is. It's disappointing to see that loss, kind of that history and that legacy loss.
I think this is a big problem for the NCAA long term. That's just my opinion. Because I think not the only thing, but one of the big things that college athletics had going forward was the rivalry.
So what's it mean for March Madness? I mean, that's what counts. I mean, Luzzetti, he's got 6,000 square feet in the Hamptons.
We'll be there. We'll be fine.
Bracket.
Villanova and Duke. But for everybody else,
but what's it mean if the Big Ten is sea to shining sea? That's what we're talking about.
I don't know. It's going to be, I think the ACC the same way. ACC has Stanford now in it.
What's it mean for UCLA, USC? I mean, that kind of rivalry.
I think that, very close rivalry does not change. But when you think about, the other rivalries within the Pac-10, Pac-12, those certainly become weakened, I think.
Focus Landau's listening to this in Frankfurt going, what in God's name
what is my chief U.S. economist talking about?
Matt Luzzetti, thank you so much with Deutsche Bank. I really want to resell you the idea that Matt Luzzetti was out there and said, you know what, we're going to see a slower economy. We did. Yep. But he had the courage and literally his first essay to say, stop guessing when the recession's coming. It's a fool's game. Speaking about a fool's game, look at the Detroit Tigers with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. G7 leaders are shifting focus to Russia and China after reaching an agreement on support for Ukraine using frozen Russian assets. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook has the latest from the G7 summit in Italy.
It's going to be direct loans from nations within the G7. The EU will be its own, and it will be proportional to each of the sides of the economy to basically write a check for $50 billion to give to Ukraine. They are hoping by the end of the year, those loans ultimately will be repaid by the proceeds, the profits of those Russian assets being held at the central banks in Europe.
Bloomberg's Oliver Crick reports the technical details of the agreement will be hammered out after this summit. It runs through Saturday. House Republicans voted to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. Garland refuses to make public the interview tapes between President Biden and the special counsel investigating his handling of classified records. No charges were recommended, but in his final report, the special counsel calls President Biden's memory into question. Republican Representative Elise Stefanik of New York, chair of the House Republican Conference, said the American public has the right to see the tapes.
It's time for Merrick Garland to stop stonewalling and release the Biden tapes.
However, Democrat Jamie Raskin says there is a different reason why Republicans are really after the tapes.
They literally don't even know what they're looking for anymore. So why do they want it? Well, they're hoping that in the 5 hours of President Biden's testimony, they can find a mispronounced word or phrase or a brief stammer, which they can then turn into an embarrassing political TV attack ad.
A transcript of the interview was already released earlier. Round one of the U.S. Open at Pinehurst is underway. Tiger Woods, one of the early golfers to tee off, is at 1 under after 3. Scottie Scheffler and Xander Schauffele go off after 1 p.m. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. And this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance, we're brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers, they charge dollar margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83% rates. Subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare. Paul, live chat, YouTube. Saves the day.
Please.
Joseph, thank you. The Big 10 will be the Big 35.
Yeah, exactly.
That says it all.
Yeah, exactly. I just think about the the UCLA field hockey team flying cross country to play in Piscataway, New Jersey, in Rutgers. Is that what we want our
students doing? I don't get it.
I just don't get it.
And I guess this fall, the better college football players are going to actually make real money, right?
Yes.
Do we know how much?
Millions.
Seriously?
Yes.
They're not going to make like 42,600.
What's happening, and Ari can maybe correct me, Rich. I mean, we have certain thresholds for what a big-time quarterback is, what a big-time receiver is, what a big-time offensive lineman is. There's a market out there. We know what these positions are worth, and if you want to pay me, I'll go there.
So does the star D1 field hockey player for Rutgers? Are you telling me they're going to make $1 million, but what are they going to make?
I don't think they're going to make much. I think it's more the football, the basketball, and maybe some selected others.
It's professional.
It is. It's totally professional. Yeah.
It's going to be Mr. American for Ford is what you're going to see.
Yeah.
You know, part of the All-American team is going to be out there, and they're going to get their NIL and get paid.
It's changing.
But then I thought the Detroit Lions would never win, and I was wrong on that. Okay. Green on the screen and advancing. NASDAQ up 0.7% off constructive disinflation. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got red and green on the screen after initial jobless claims came in higher than expected last week, rising 13,000 to 242,000, the highest level in 9 months. Continuing claims, they also rose. Then we had U.S. producer prices. They unexpectedly fell in May by the most in 7 months, and that could give investors even more confidence that the Fed can cut interest rates before the year is out. Right now, we have S&P futures up 0.2%, Dow futures down 0.1%, NASDAQ futures up 0.6%. The 2-year yield at 4.69%. That's up. That's down 6 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.26%, and that's down 5 basis points. Over to Disney, their shares little change. The New York Times reporting Disney, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, they've reached this agreement that locks in a 15-year expansion plan for Disney World. Then you have Sony Pictures, the Wall Street Journal reporting it's acquired dine-in theater chain Alamo Drafthouse Cinema. Yes, a movie company owning a movie theater. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Did we learn anything about Paramount yesterday?
Absolutely.
Are they making multiple further progress?
There's nothing, Tom. Unfortunately, no. There's no, in my opinion, there's no credible bidders out there. Either strategic or financial. So it is what it is.
I am happy. I get to talk to Wendy Schiller with Paul Sweeney. She's at Brown University because she owns the high ground and the linkage of our history into where we are. As I walked into the building this morning, got off Sikorsky, came down the elevator.
Sure.
As I walked into the building, I stared at the G7 photo shoot, and Ed Duffner said, "Tom, it's the Potsdam Conference." Wendy Schiller, what a train wreck of a photo shoot at the G7. 1945, Potsdam, Roosevelt dies, Truman shows up, different guy. While they're there, Churchill's thrown out of office, Clement Attlee becomes a prime minister, and Stalin's fading, smiling all the way. Wendy Schiller, I saw the guy from Germany going, "I think I'm still in power." Macron hasn't slept in a week. The president has his own challenges. Trudeau's, I don't know what Trudeau's doing. It's a disaster. That's what Trump would say. He said, "It's a disaster in Canada." And on the back end of it is Rishi Sunak, who stiffed D-Day. What a mess. Have you ever seen a G7 like this, Wendy Schiller?
I have not. And the irony is that we're not facing a global economic crisis. So, you know, a lot of these leaders, a lot of the parties, whether they're conservative or more moderate, you know, business friendly, they're facing populist sort of anger and gains. I mean, really in the EU elections, and certainly look at Italy, look at Hungary, look all over the place. And you see that it's not connected as much to economic discontent as it was, as we might have expected it to be 10 years ago. So then that's a bigger puzzle, and that's what brings back World War II. Right. So what are these deep strains or trends in Europe? Certainly anti-migrant is one of them. But if the economy is getting better, and clearly the United States is leading there, but nonetheless getting better, yet all these sort of moderate, quote unquote, liberal democracy, these leaders are fading.
Right.
That's a big puzzle for us.
Off of the debate at Chicago, at Milwaukee, after Labor Day, are we going to see the same populist angst in America?
Well, so I think the trends are actually working against that to some extent in terms of the economy, right? So we have a little bit of a tick of unemployment, but we had a really good jobs report, and inflation, depending on who you talk to, seems to be at least calming down. So if consumer sentiment starts to rise just a little bit over the summer, folks can take a vacation, they feel comfortable about that, they have a good summer, they're feeling better about the economy, then I think things kind of moderate a little bit on these big pushbacks in terms of the far right. But Trump is courting big business. He's being very strategic about it. He said, listen, don't worry about me. I'm just going to do taxes, lower them, keep them low, and I'm going to get rid of regulation. I'm going to make you happy. I'm not going to do anything scary. And that's going to be his message today in Washington. And that's the big problem for the Biden administration is what do you do with that messaging? And how does Trump keep that far right wing of his party calm enough not to scare a lot of the independent voters away again in 2024?
Wendy, what do we know about those independent voters, those centrist type of voters? I guess by and large, they broke for President Biden last time around. They broke for the Democratic Party in some of the congressional election cycles. What do we know about that group here, which will be critical for the presidential election coming up later this year?
The only recent information we have is after the Trump 34 felony convictions, some polling indicated that some percentage of those independents were less likely to vote for Trump. But you're looking at a body that's probably not likely to vote for Trump anyway. What's interesting is the polling coming out of Senate Democratic incumbents in swing states. They're actually doing better than Biden. And they're doing better than the Republican opponents or, supposed Republican opponents. So how are the Democratic incumbent senators holding on in swing states and Biden is behind Trump or tied with Trump? So that suggests some independents may be recalibrating, thinking, hey, we'll vote for Trump, keep our low taxes, but we'll vote for Senate Democrats to control Donald Trump and not give the Republicans a trifecta. It seems like there could be more split ticket voting this time around.
Okay, let's talk about that because it's not really in the zeitgeist, yes, but you just mentioned it. Could we see a GOP trifecta?
Well, that's the thing that I'm watching in terms of these Senate races, particularly Wisconsin, Arizona. Pennsylvania's a little bit dodgy. There's an open seat in Michigan. But thinking about those races and thinking about even Sherrod Brown in Ohio is up by 4 or 5 points against Bernie Moreno. Trump will win Ohio, I think. So that's going to be an interesting thing. I mean, I think the House is totally up for grabs, right? It's an 8-seat race. Right. There may be 30 competitive seats and 8 can switch, and then one party can take over with a narrow majority. So we don't know about the House, but the Senate is supposed to be in Republicans' favor, just doing the math. But right now, it looks like the Democrats are holding their own, and that's going to be what I'm watching going forward.
Wendy, this isn't why we booked you. There's Route 146, which comes out of Providence, the land of decent pizza, up to a suburb called Boston. And in between is Foxborough. Did you attend the Tom Brady Hall of Fame soiree at Gillette Stadium, Professor Schiller?
I did not. I hearken from the New York, Long Island area, and I am a Giants fan.
Well, you could have worn your Giants jersey. I mean, you could.
No, I did that at a Super Bowl party when the Giants beat the Patriots, and it wasn't popular.
Oh, there we go. Got that in. Professor Schiller, go away. Thank you. At Brown University, truly with their leadership in international relations. They retired Brady's jersey. Yep. Everybody showed up. It was a love fest.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
And now he's going to, presumably, he's going to be our guy in the Fox booth, Tom. I think Fox is paying him $1 gajillion a year, small fortune, to be the analyst for their football. He's
total
go back
classic. Drew Bledsoe, he was the quarterback before. I remember the moment where this no-name from Michigan walked in. Drew Bledsoe, if he was a jerk while he was doing all this, the turnout would be very different.
Right.
That's a complete class act from Drew Bledsoe.
Yep, exactly. I mean, again, what a run. I mean, so you got to hand it to Tom Brady, the best of all time, no question about it. And then to get that Super Bowl down in Florida, Tampa, was just amazing as well. So,
yeah, that's right. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah. So I mean, he just showed he can.
Now, can he unretire now?
Yeah, come back.
I mean, why not?
I mean, he's in amazing physical shapes here, so he's kind of redefining when you retire here for the NFL.
Let's redefine a data check right now. We're going to get an 11 on the VIX. It's a bull market, folks, 12.07 on the VIX. Got green on the screen with the SPX up 16. NASDAQ advances. It was up 0.6%, now up 0.7%. The 2-year yield in 6 basis points of disinflationary tendencies. So, they said they had a meeting, sometimes the brass, they want to, they take me out to a quality lunch.
Nice.
McDonald's, 3rd Avenue. They go large.
It's solid.
So I'm there with our Bloomberg radio brass yesterday, and they say, Tom, the songs have been suspect.
Oh, boy.
You played some French stuff, Francis Cabrel, the other day, and they said, Tom, we beg you, don't play Simon and Garfunkel.
Oh, so of course.
That's all they wanted to talk about.
Yep.
Was Sparta. It was like, you can't play Simon and Garfunkel. So I said, okay, we'll lose the touchy-feely acoustic stuff, which you can do, because then you can play Susanna Hoffs in the Bangles, playing Simon and Garfunkel. Good morning, everyone.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney with a lift to the market again. Dow a little bit fractionally soft, red and green in the screen, but the NASDAQ sustained and up 0.7%. Paul, have we had anyone with a 10-for-1 stock split after Broadcom?
Exactly. I mean, it seems to be what the
every
smart
3
kids are doing
days.
out in Silicon Valley these days.
Do you think Buffet will ever do a 50-for-1?
Should. Absolutely. I don't know why. But now with fractional shares you can buy, maybe it's not such a big deal.
What do you think? This is a big debate. I mean, I'd love to talk to Abby Johnson up at Fidelity about it. I know fractional shares are out there, but there's just still something about a stock split and accessibility.
And buying a 100-share round lot here.
Yeah.
I mean, having worked at firms that have big retail forces like Smith Barney and Merrill Lynch, man, when you've got retail behind you, you can move stock.
I'm depressed. I mean, I'm researching Tom Brady and the Hall of Fame thing up at Foxborough last night. And of course, like you'd expect on any website, if it's New England, there's a Hinckley Yachts ad. Mm-hmm. They got Porcelli's boat on here. They got the Hinckley picnic boat that Porcelli comes down the Hudson River every morning to beach him.
Good for him.
It's a gorgeous boat. I mean, it's just,
Yeah, I know. That's beautiful.
I mean, it's like a house. It's just really, really gorgeous. We're here. Futures up 14. We say good morning to all of you on economics, finance, investment. In this hour, oil, Amrita Sen. In this hour, for Academic Wall Street, Brad Setzer will join us. He is definitive, particularly on China. Really looking forward to talking to Brad Setzer. He's truly someone of the zeitgeist. We're in the Interactive Broker Studios on YouTube, on Android, on Apple CarPlay, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. And futures right now still mixed after some more economic data. We had initial jobless claims came in higher than expected last week. And they rose to the highest level in 9 months. We also had U.S. producer prices, while they unexpectedly fell in May. So right now we have S&P futures up 0.2%, 13 points. We have Dow futures down 0.2%, or 81 points. And NASDAQ futures up 0.6%, 131 points. Leading the charge there, helping give it, though, that boost is Broadcom. Their shares up 13%. Its latest results topped estimates. It also announced a 10-for-1 stock split. And sticking with tech, Bloomberg reporting OpenAI is on pace for $3.4 billion of annual revenue. And finally, some news from eBay. The company says it's expanding its payment options by adding Venmo. Their shares up 0.3%. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.69%. That's down 5 basis points, and the yield on the 10-year at 4.27%, down 4 basis points. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. What I know, and I really want, within the grind of Wall Street, the day never ends, and Bruce Kasman and Michael Feroli ruined it at JPMorgan because they published their must-read weekly prospects. It's 7:05 p.m. Friday night.
Yeah, thank you.
I've read about 85% of Feroli that I've read in a bar.
Right, exactly.
It's the way it is.
Yep.
And they're making multiple further progress towards this Friday where they'll publish the weekly progress. Joining us now from JPMorgan, Michael Feroli. Michael, what in God's name is multiple further progress? And what do you write about Friday in your weekly prospects?
Well, it's hard to say. I think you're referring to the FOMC statement yesterday, and I think that was probably influenced in part by what we saw yesterday morning with the CPI report, and that's probably going to be a big part of what we write about tomorrow.
So, Tom, does Michael Feroli, does he get an office at the new JPMorgan building on Park Avenue?
They get a floor.
He gets a floor? Okay. I don't know if it's a cubicle
they're
or
above
an
the
office.
gold vault, though.
Okay. Exactly.
The diamond vault. Okay.
The vault,
Continue.
exactly. Hey, Michael, what did you take from Fed Chairman Jay Powell's comments yesterday? It kind of feels like he's in a pretty good position. He doesn't need to rush into anything. What did you take away from it?
Yeah, I do think he's pretty satisfied with where things are going, and I think he's probably satisfied that he's taken a pretty calm approach both to the favorable inflation surprises we got in the second half of last year, the less favorable surprises we got in the first quarter of this year. And I think he's kept a pretty, good eye on the horizon rather than getting too, swung around here. But, I think he's happy with the progress on inflation, labor market. I think, I think over the last several press conferences he has, and the market, I think, agrees, came out quite dovish. Yesterday, I thought he had struck the same tone that you kind of picked up in the statement and in the dots and so forth. So I thought he was much more balanced yesterday. But the one area where he sounded dovish was, I think, on the labor market.
Right now, folks, for Global Wall Street, the single question to Michael Feroli of the Booth School of Chicago and JPMorgan. Michael, you stopped time a long time ago with a potential GDP of America that was sub 2%. If we impute a higher R-star, if we settle for something above 2.x%, as Richard Clarett and others talk about, if we model in a new inflation, what does that do to your potential GDP estimate? Does it lift?
So I'm not really yet on the higher trend growth story. I do see, obviously, so first of all, I guess we can divide trend growth into trend labor force growth and trend productivity growth. I think clearly labor force growth has been stronger in recent years, given the immigration story. How much of that is sustained after the election and on into next year, I think is more of a question. I think on productivity, it's still hard for me to be a big believer in that, in part because when you look at the capital deepening numbers, which is essentially investment after depreciation, they really haven't changed much since the slow growth decade we had last decade. So once that, if that changes, I'll be more of a believer. But I think, what we saw in the first quarter was kind of, to me, a return to earth after what was a pretty good second half last year for productivity. But without those investment numbers, I'm still kind of thinking we're in the slow growth trend here.
Michael, what's your view on inflation here? We had the beginning in the first quarter, the first 3 months, kind of a pickup in inflation activity. Kind of caused some people to really step back here and think about the moderation call on inflation. How do you think about it here as this Fed tries to get to its 2% target?
I still think the moderation is in place. And, when I look at, I think in particular, when you look at nominal wage growth, wage inflation, and I know the links between wage and price inflation are very contentious, but I think in the long run, no one disputes that there's got to be some linkage there, right? And what you've seen for production workers is that wage inflation after peaking around 7% has come down to around 4%. Now, I know May was a little stronger for average hourly inflation, but I think when you look at, you kind of look impressionistically at average hourly earnings, Atlanta Fed wage tracker, ECI, ECEC, all these things kind of suggest moderation in wage inflation, which is ongoing. And I think as long as that is in place, I think the price inflation story to me looks like it's in place. But again, these are stories I think you have to kind of zoom back at and look at a quarterly frequency. But I think the story to me looks, pretty intact when I look at the fundamental driver there.
Michael, thank you so much, particularly those discussions of potential GDP, a key part of JPMorgan research. Dr. Feroli working at Bruce Kasman. As you said, Paul, they're putting a building. You can see it. It's like tall,
Yeah, it's been fun to watch them
like
build this thing.
The Burj, what's it called in Dubai? It's like, ginormous.
Spectacular. They knock down one building, they put up another. It's going to be the global headquarters at JPMorgan on Park Avenue.
They're going to serve all healthy food that Lisa Mateo would like.
Yeah, crazy.
Futures up 13, the NASDAQ up 0.6%. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa, former President Donald Trump returns to Washington today for the first time since his felony convictions in New York. He'll meet with congressional Republicans to firm up their support and set a policy agenda for a potential Trump return to the White House. Bloomberg Government's Jack Fitzpatrick has more from Washington.
There's been some increasing discussion among Republicans about, well, what exactly will we do if we win the House, Senate, and the presidency? What kind of legislation would we push if we really are in charge? And as we get closer to Election Day, there's a lot of curiosity about where exactly the former president and the Republican nominee stands on major policy issues. So I think there's some excitement around Republicans meeting with former President Trump, and also a bit of early work to do in terms of hashing out exactly what their top priorities would be legislatively.
Bloomberg Government's Jack Fitzpatrick reports Trump will also give a speech to corporate CEOs at an event hosted by the Business Roundtable. The G7 summit has started today in Italy. An agreement already includes a U.S. proposal to use Russian assets for a $50 billion loan to Ukraine. Growing support for Ukraine despite threats from Vladimir Putin over the U.S. green-lighting attacks on Russian targets near Ukraine's border. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin meeting with NATO defense ministers in Brussels this morning.
I'm grateful to Sweden for announcing its largest military assistance package yet, worth approximately $1.23 billion.
Secretary Austin announcing that along with Sweden, Spain, and Belgium are joining the U.S. in providing billions of dollars in additional military support for Ukraine. Round one of the U.S. Open is underway at Pinehurst. After 4, Tiger Woods. Look at Tiger going, Tiger. He teed off about an hour and a half ago. One shot off the lead at 1 under. Scotty Scheffler, Xander Schauffele go off after 1 p.m. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Thank you, Michael Barr. Now joining us, frankly, I don't give a damn, correspondent Lisa Mateo, just back from Atlanta. Lisa, great. You were at Bar Vegan, of course, down in Atlanta, having a Buckhead Bentley, Grey Goose Hendrix Patron, all mixed together.
Nice.
Nice. Cointreau, peach lemon. This is before maple glaze Brussels sprouts. Good morning, Bar Vegan. Come on, Atlanta's booming, right?
It is. No, it was amazing. I was right in the middle of the shopping district, too, which was very dangerous.
Yeah.
Very dangerous. I tried to stay away. But yeah, and then you just see, what I noticed, too, is where I was at, they call it the Beverly Hills of the South. What area is it again?
Buckhead.
Buckhead, that's
Buckhead.
it. And just the fancy cars going, you see.
But I stay at the Ritz in Buckhead. That's the only place to stay there.
Well, of course.
I mean, that's how you play it down there.
And you were down there for Bloomberg LP, right? This is a big event.
Correct.
What did you accomplish after your Buckhead Bentley, Grey Goose Hendrix, and Patron?
Well, here's one interesting tidbit that I learned. AI, that was what the conference was about. And one thing I learned is that some companies, like Northwell Health was one of them, they're putting this portion aside for bonuses for their employees who come up with AI ideas who get approved. So they're already right now checks to the employees for coming out with the
Michael
ideas.
Barr got a bonus. He said less Tom Keene, and they paid him.
Yeah, and we both get a case of Stroh's in the process.
Exactly. Thank you, Lisa Mateo, again, out really talking to the Bloomberg terminal world, and again, about artificial intelligence. Have we recovered from the Apple conference yet?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's been stocks had a nice run. It feels like it might have been overdone, but I didn't really hear that much from them in terms of real substance. But you just know they're going to be a player in AI, and it's just a question of when, in my opinion. So they're moving there now, and it's all going to be about their app store. And I'll listen to.
I don't hear much. Do you hear much effervescence about the stock market? I don't.
No, I mean we're just marching higher. Again, the S&P futures up about 1% here today.
Let's see, red and green on the screen. Nasdaq up 0.7%, continues to lead the way. Lisa with that 10-to-1 stock split from Broadcom, sort of the zest for the morning. From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have red and green on the screen. We've got S&P futures up 0.2%, Dow futures down 0.2%. We have Nasdaq futures up 0.6%, or 133 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.69%, down 5 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.26%, and that's down 5 basis points. Quick check of commodities. We have spot gold lower, $2,318 an ounce. Brent crude $82 a barrel. WTI crude $78 a barrel. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Our clients have responsibilities we take very seriously when they call up and say, I got to go. Amrita Sen has to go, but Complete Class Act shows up for 4 minutes with us this morning with energy aspects in London on oil. I guess there's a lot of reports out. You're expert, Amrita Sen, at the supply and demand of oil. Which you care more about right now, supply or demand dynamics?
Hi, Tom. Always good to speak. Demand, for sure. And I think, you and I have spoken about this before as well. Demand is the bigger driver simply because it's also very hard to kind of get to really understand the true extent of demand weakness or demand strength. The quality of the data tends to be poor as well. Supply, we have more visibility, and particularly with OPEC providing forward guidance in terms of what they're going to do. Demand is the challenge. Right now, demand hasn't been great, particularly in China and in the US. I'm in Canada right now, and I was in the US all of the last 2 weeks. And we can see that that's where the struggle has been for oil to rally. Starting to see some better signs on demand, but it is going to take longer to kind of really recover.
Dr. Sen, talk to us about China here, because I think most investors don't have a good handle on where the demand is in China. How do you view that these days?
I was there just about a month ago, and I was really taken aback by just how bearish sentiment was over there. In part because I think the government's promised a lot of infrastructure projects, but they actually haven't come through yet. Partly, I understand from talking to them, it was around, the government was looking into the details of it, so the implementation was delayed. We've also had LNG trucking make dent into diesel demand. We believe about 300,000 barrels per day by year end this year. But the flip side is gasoline and jet demand were very strong. People were driving, people are flying. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but sentiment was definitely very bearish because the economy wasn't doing very well.
Right. On the supply side, how should we think about OPEC plus these days in terms of their ability to influence the price of global energy?
Look, what OPEC really do very, very well, which I don't think they necessarily get the credit for, is taking away the volatility in the market, right? What they're saying is, look, this is production. They're continuing with the cuts because they are also concerned about demand. They can see, even though the Secretariat's demand numbers are strong, I think that there's definitely concerns around that. So they extend the cuts. But then after that, they're providing forward guidance saying, if the market were to require the additional oil, this is the sequence with which we're going to bring it back. I think we have seen a really stable oil price environment, at least the last 12 months or so. Brent's between 80 and 90. And I think that's what is going to be the case this year, especially because the U.S. government then acts the other way, fills SPR at low prices, but then it's also threatening to release SPR at higher prices.
Amrita Sen, thank you so much for the visit this morning with energy aspects. Again, red and green on the screen. The VIX right on an 11 level, 12.07, a bull market, I guess, in tech. Brent crude, 82.88. Right now, he and his people are putting together the big take. Okay. They're making multiple further progress on the big take. How do you come up with a big take? Is it an editorial meeting at 5 a.m.?
Yeah.
Or is it over cocktails the day
4:30.
before? David Gura joins us right now.
Yeah. It's a mix. We have obviously a vast newsroom that spans the globe, and we are getting great suggestions from our colleagues on Bloomberg News, but then we have a team working on the podcast as well who are coming up with pitches and ideas. Also, then we're looking at the news and we're seeing sort of where we can add value to the conversation.
How about that G7 photo shoot
My gosh,
today?
I pulled it up here and I heard your conversation with Anne-Marie. the awkwardness is palpable.
I've never seen it ever. And I
it's
would
like
bet,
a freshman mixer, you know.
Yes.
No,
Yeah,
that's exactly brilliant. That's exactly right.
Where are the Aperol spritzes? Not out yet.
Well, they probably were out later. It would be my guess. What are you doing on the big take today, or let's say 24 hours?
Yeah, so we're looking at doing something on Europe. Obviously, this is kind of a roiling story about the rise of the far right in Europe, and I think what's kind of interesting about that topic, Tom, is that there's so much that we don't know about the timetable here. There's so much that we don't know about the motivations that President Macron had for calling this the snap election and what's happening in the UK and across the continent. So we're wading into those waters. I'm hoping to call our friend Lionel Laurent of Bloomberg Opinion a little later today and just get his sense.
He won't talk to us.
But of course, has a foot in London where he used to live. He's now moved to Paris, and I think that's what we're hoping to do with that episode.
How do we get this, Lisa?
Sense.
How do we, like Phil Serafino moves to Paris, Jim Hertling moves to Paris. Lionel, come on, Paul.
I think
what
that you go and
here?
apologize afterward, or you ask for permission after. You just got to go, Tom.
Just show up.
Yes. Is that where you're going to be tomorrow? You're going to be.
Paul, one more question on all this big things.
All right, David. So, on this move to the far right, it's a global phenomenon. It's, I think we probably all first experienced it when we saw the Brexit vote come. And then, of course, the election of President Trump, and then it's just been kind of building or rolling, and here we go again here in Europe.
I think it's a really interesting parallel, and you look at what President Macron did, and a lot of people are drawing that parallel to David Cameron, then Prime Minister, now Foreign Secretary, who made that call to have that Brexit vote, and maybe this is something like it. I mean, I was listening to Gideon Rockman of the FT, has a podcast as well. He was talking about how Macron has this reputation for being a gambler. Maybe that's what we're seeing here is him doing that. But I think that tacit in what he's done is this acknowledgement that is such a rising movement. It's kind of handicapped him in Parliament and able to get any legislation through. But it is, as you say, something that's happening all around the world.
David Gura, the biggest response we've had of the morning was John Stolfus parsing Brazilian or Indian rosewood with Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and Martin guitars. Paul Sweeney, if you want to get Philip Gura's C.F. Martin and his guitars hardcover,
you could get him on the
mint
show.
condition, $249 for a damn coffee book on Martin guitars. Really? It's unbelievable.
I think you have one,
Did you
don't
grow
you?
up? No, well, that's a long story. My major guitars at Gibson J100, we won't go there, from Montana. Did you grow up with Martin guitars everywhere?
They were around the house, and my dad collects guitars and banjos, and there's a constant movement among his collection. He'll trade one for another, and he has friends he'll swap instruments with. But the story of that book is so amazing. It happened when I was a kid, and we were on a road trip to Massachusetts, and on the way back, he got a call that the Martin Guitar Factory had essentially all of its records dating back to the 19th century in a giant safe. And my dad, who's an historian at UNC, couldn't believe that. Plays the guitar, plays the banjo. We pull into Nazareth, as the song goes, and that safe is opened up, and my dad couldn't believe it. And it's still a family company. The heir of the company said to him, if you want to take these down to North Carolina, you can. Just put them in the rare books library. And so my dad packed these boxes of records into the minivan. I don't think that we stopped the entire drive back to Chapel Hill until he could get them safely into that library. But the book that you bring up is a fascinating book because, yes, it's about the instrument and his love of guitars, but it's also just an amazing business book because you have these contemporaneous records, business records from the 19th century going up to today, showing what kind of wood showing the Brazilian rosewood, showing the ebony that they bought and how they started in New York and moved to Pennsylvania.
I'm begging for everyone out there. We need Philip Gura. I'm going to guess 1935 to 2024.
Yeah.
Put 100 years on it.
Yeah.
Is he working on volume 2? Dolly Parton called me this morning and said, what is the guy doing at UNC?
I will encourage him to do it. But he has a beloved pre-war D0018. That's his. That's
like
his
Genesee.
Yes, a smaller model.
Very cool. David Gura, thank you so much. The Big Take. Look for that out on Apple Podcasts, among other resources. Thank you out on YouTube for the live chat this morning on John Stolfus and all the chit-chat here. And we got a huge response to Susanna Hoffs. We played the Bengals.
Well, we got to get Mr. Gura and Stolfus together. Because
that would be good.
We've talked about it, John and I. That happened.
Okay.
We have never done it, but
we don't. Well, that's the way we do it.
You're building
in
a studio,
Just
Tom. You can have us in. You can master the session.
Yes.
We'll do it. David Gura, thank you so much. Look for the Big Take here. Really important. I want to make clear this is 20 minutes of in-depth effort using all the resources of Bloomberg News. The Big Take with David Gurrow. Look for that. He's working like a 3-day work week.
Yeah, that's all right. It's okay.
Every day.
It came from NPR work.
We're lucky he's not work from home today.
Exactly.
Wait, the kids are out of school.
I am
no
wearing
wonder
sneakers.
He's in the office.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. From New York City, we need to get the market open. We do it with red and green on the screen. I'm sorry, the NASDAQ won't pull back. That's the headline today. Good morning, Atlanta. Good morning, Buckhead, Georgia. Lisa Mateo back in the studio. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. So how will the markets react after more economic data? We had initial jobless claims came in higher than expected last week, rising 13,000 to 242,000. Continuing claims they rose to. And then you had U.S. producer prices. They unexpectedly fell in May with its biggest decline since October. All right, we're off and running now. So let's start with the S&P 500. Right now, it is up about 0.3%, 15 points. points at 5,436. The Dow down 0.2%, 85 points at 38,626. And finally, we get to the NASDAQ, up about 0.6%, 112 points, and that's at 17,714. We'll take you over to the 2-year yield, 4.70%, down 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.27%, that's down 4 basis points. Over to commodities, we have spot gold lower, 2,319 an ounce. We have Brent crude at $82 a barrel, WTI crude at $78 a barrel. At the open, I want to also check in with Broadcom. They are up 13%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. Paul and I decided that, everybody's underplaying the bull market. And I did a chart today of Ben Laidler in December of 2018 saying, things aren't this grim, get on board. And it's been a ride through October of, I think it was 22, October of 23, up. And our next guest is someone where you got to be in the market to play. And it's a terse single sentence: stay defensive, own really good companies, and have a 5-year time frame. And it's great to talk to Ted Oakley here on a bull market day. NASDAQ up 0.8%. Again, he's an institution in Austin, Texas. Our other idea today on the show has been Martin guitars. and the reason you live in Austin, folks, is to go to Austin City Limits and see Merle Haggard 7, 8, 9 times that he's been there. Record holder, help me make it through December. I hope we make, what is it like living in Austin, sitting at Austin City Limits, listening 15 feet away to Merle Haggard? What is that like?
Well, it's great, Tom. We have a lot of great music there. This past year I saw Diana Ross. I mean, when you can get close to people there, and that's a great place to watch music. That particular Moody Coliseum, the 018 at Austin City Limits, is fantastic.
The bull market, and you've been part of this. You've done a huge amount with Maria Bartiromo. Can I say it's Maria's 25th wedding anniversary today?
Oh, very
Maria,
good. Really?
She invented the chat in New York Wall Street. Our regards to Maria Bartiromo today on 25th anniversary. Ted Oakley, you're someone that invests for long term. How do you rationalize the big tech juggernaut?
Well, Tom, what happens is we have this concentration now that it's actually more than it was in 99, 2000. And we own a lot of those companies, but we haven't bought them in the last couple of years. They just didn't meet our valuation levels. We still own them. But that's the problem today. If you start new money out today and you look at these companies, it's very hard for you to have to, if you think about NVIDIA has beaten the, contribution-wise, the other 495 stocks this year. So you could say, I'll just buy NVIDIA and some treasuries and go to the house. But that's hard to do when you're handling other people's money. And so I think that's the problem now, is that it's got a bit extended, and it wouldn't be something we would want to tap into at this level, I don't think.
So how do you look at valuation these days? When you screen, what's your valuation screen look like?
Well, we screen about 250 companies, Paul, and we look for a number of things, but we look for lower debt. We look for an earnings forecast over the next 5 years, and basically, obviously, bring it back for inflation. And then we try to buy below that number if we can. We don't have many companies that hit the screen today, though. That's the problem. We do have, we have some consumer staples, we have some energy, different things, but it's hard. It's harder with the big techs for us.
A lot of the tech bulls will say these companies are earning themselves into their multiples. You take a look at like NVIDIA. I mean, it's more than quadrupled its profitability in the last few years. And if you look at the PE, it's like, it's 75 times trailing, but 30 times forward or something for a 30% grower. So it's just the growth is kind of there to support it. And that's different than 99, because I didn't have any earnings for the companies I took public in 1999. But I still
that's true. But a lot of them did have earnings too. I mean, they were good companies. They were making money. They were just overpriced. And I've looked a lot. I'd like to own the company that will be able to take AI and ferret out the misinformation. Mm-hmm. Now, that would be a company to find if you could, because that's probably the type of company you want to own after the fact.
So,
go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, so how do you think about it?
I'm trying to get my first buy order in, coming out of triple leveraged all cash.
Exactly.
Excuse me.
How do you think about this AI thing? You've seen the growth of the birth and growth of the internet before. You've seen just technology over your 30, 40-year career. How do you think about AI here?
Well, I think it's a lot like the internet, except that you never know what the other side after 5 or 6 years will look like. It will be important, and it will be used a lot, but it probably won't be used in the manner that people think right now, because they never can, you can't figure out what the future is and how you're going to use something till you get it and you can use it in day-to-day action. And that's what I think you'll end up doing.
Okay, so you and Michael Dell, you're on Research Boulevard in Austin, Texas at the Costco. You run into Michael Dell. You guys are old friends. What are the two of you talking about the New York Stock Exchange is going to move and be the Dallas Michael Dell Stock Exchange? Are you kidding me? This is un-American.
Well, it is interesting, Tom. And I guess it must have affected Michael Dell, because I think he's going to sell $3 billion worth this year. He just came out. I think he came out in the news. But I suppose people are looking at it and thinking maybe we should have another place where you do business as opposed to just the New York Stock Exchange. And I don't really, since I'm not a member of the exchange, I can't comment on it. But that's the way I see it, at least from that standpoint. So,
Ted, what are some of the sectors that you guys like these days? I don't know, either from an earnings growth perspective, a strength of balance sheet. What are some of the sectors that you guys are looking at today? Because it's kind of tough out there if you don't own some of these big tech names.
Well, I'll give you an example. We own Microsoft for 15 years.
Okay.
And so, we own Apple, we own Google. But the only one of those group we think is a buy now is Google. But if you look at some standbys we've had for years, MasterCard, Visa, and then the new things we bought is consumer staples. In other words, we're looking at Kimberly-Clark, Coca-Cola, things that probably have been affected by the weight drugs. They think they're not going to buy them. And we own energy, when I say energy, we own the pipelines. We like the cash flow. We own healthcare. Elevance we just bought in the last 3 months. But there's things to own. It's just that you have to be picky.
How prosaic. Kimberly-Clark, PE of 17, estimated PE maybe around the same level, 41,000 people. Of course, he's got to buy a company in Texas.
No, of course.
Dallas.
Dallas.
Texas. How boring. Does their management have free cash flow religion? Do they have use of cash religion?
Well, what happens on Kimberly, this is what we think will happen at least. We think that two things are going to happen. You're going to end up with people going back to the staples side because the economy probably is getting weaker than people think. And those kinds of companies will continue to do well, we think, during that period. And Kimberly, again, a lot of those consumer staples, Tom, have come down in price. We just feel like we'll get a move on them.
Okay, I got one final question. It's critical. Things are so screwed up. Oklahoma and the Longhorns are moving to the SEC, and Texas Tech is going to the Big 12 so they can play Cincinnati. It's nuts.
I don't know. It's crazy. I don't know. I think the whole state
Nobody
of Texas...
wants to play Texas Tech because they always beat them. They're really quite good. I don't get it.
You have to have Texas, Oklahoma.
Can we bring back the Cotton Bowl Thanksgiving morning? The Aggies versus the Longhorns. Yeah. Can you fix that, Ted?
Well, it's going to be played again this year. I think it's going to be played at A&M, and I have to be careful because my wife has been employed by University of Texas for a long time. Okay, so I have to be on her side, at least even though I didn't go to school there.
The marriage survived Texas Tech in Texas?
It survived, but it had its moments.
Okay, we'll leave it there and not go further. Ted Oakley, thank you so much. Oxbow Advisors of Austin, Texas, and just a joy. Paul, I can't say enough about how we get people in from outside 3 zip codes.
Yep.
It's like a whole new world after all.
It is.
We'll see. Did you see Ted Oakley in Costco?
No, please come on.
Thank you. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. U.S. reporter Evan Gershkovich, jailed in Russia on espionage charges, will stand trial in Russia. The prosecutor's office said today that Gershkovich is accused of gathering secret information about a facility in a region that produced and repaired military equipment. It reveals for the first time the details of the accusations against the jailed reporter. Former President Donald Trump is coming back to the nation's capital for the first time since his felony conviction in New York last month. He'll be meeting with the GOP lawmakers for a show of their support. We get more from Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson in Washington.
He is meeting with the House Republicans and Senate Republicans to set the policy for the rest of this year, and then if they win after that. I think even if he loses, and Biden is president, Republicans in Congress will still be pushed and pulled by Donald Trump in terms of the policy that they're going to talk about before he goes and meets with the most powerful CEOs in the country.
Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson says CEOs expected to attend that meeting include JPMorgan Chase's Jamie Dimon, Jane Fraser of Citigroup, Bank of America's Brian Moynihan, and Apple CEO Tim Cook. The event will be hosted by the Business Roundtable. The G7 summit opened in Italy with an agreement on a U.S. proposal to back a $50 billion loan to Ukraine using frozen Russian assets as collateral. A tropical disturbance has brought a rare flash flood emergency to much of southern Florida. The downpours and subsequent flooding blocked roads and floated vehicles. Dania Beach received about a foot of rain, according to Mayor A.J. Ryan.
I've definitely seen residents in kayaks and rafts trying to help other residents and, getting outside and assisting others. So that's really a great thing to see.
Floridians prepare to weather more heavy rainfall today and Friday. Finally, round one of the U.S. Open at Pinehurst is underway. And yes, I get it. There's a gaggle of them with the early group. But after 6, Tiger Woods is tied for the lead at 1 under.
Oh.
Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Hopefully he won't get arrested parking his car for round 3 or whatever. Michael Barr, thank you so much for bringing up the rain in Florida, Paul.
Yep.
This is on my radar, which is hurricane season.
Yeah.
Given global warming, the temperature of the oceans, I mean, this is Fox, there's many other sources, hurricane experts push forward with aggressive forecasts. Rich Truman, can we get Rob Carolyn on in the next couple days? This is serious,
It is, and we had the on Bloomberg Intelligence show with Alex Steele and I were talking to the head of the biggest electric utility in Florida, and he says they are on hurricane watch 24/7 all year round. They're used to it. They've had 40 hurricanes in the last 30 years. It's just a normal course of business for folks down there these days. So again, hurricane season.
Right.
It was a light season last year.
Yeah.
And we'll see how they do this year. Hopefully not.
Radar up. We'll give
bad.
you coverage on that as we can. Look for Bloomberg Intelligence to do that with Alex. Alex still demands that.
Oh, of course.
Paul's like, whatever.
Yep.
But Alex has a tantrum if we don't cover hurricanes. What you need to know is futures lifted, and then they've lifted again. NASDAQ was up 0.6%. On a bid now, up 0.8%. SPX up 13 points. And there's the VIX, under 12. Wow, it's a bull market. 11.97 on the VIX. A lower number is more exuberance, as seen by the volatility index percent. A 10-year real yield, 2.04%. From New York City, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, and Lisa Mateo is back. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Treasury yields fell after the cool down in another key measure for inflation that reinforced those bets for the Fed to cut interest rates this year. So we'll get to the two-year yield at 4.71%, down 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.27, down 4 basis points. Taking a look at stocks, we have the NASDAQ up 0.6%, 121 points, 17,729. We have the Dow down 0.5%, 218 points at 38,492. And finally, the S&P 500 up 0.1%, 8 points at 5,429. Shares of restaurant entertainment chain Dave & Buster's, well, they're really taking a hit. They're down about 10% right now. Reported first quarter revenue, earnings per share, missed estimates. And then shares of Tesla, they're higher. They're up about 6%. This is ahead of its shareholder meeting today. Elon Musk says shareholders voted, quote, by wide margins in favor of reapproving his compensation package and moving the company's legal home to Texas. And sticking with cars, a new study from Jado Dynamics, it shows China's car makers outsold their U.S. counterparts for the first time last year. Brands led by BYD, Japanese brands, they continued their lead. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. That's a perfect lead into this guest. This is a joy. It's one of the most interesting academic paths of American economics. First of all, I just survived Nouriel Roubini as his first job out of school. I mean, that alone is, amazing. Brad Setzer was on the Charles River at a small university, went to Sciences Po in Paris, and then wandered over. He did the triangle thing. He did the grand tour over to Oxford and all that. And, he caught everybody's eye early, and he writes piercing economics. His new essay in Foreign Affairs magazine is the article to throw at the smart-mouth high school, college offspring who says, I'm bored, I don't know what to read, I don't know what to do. Just shut up and throw Brad Setzer at him in Foreign Affairs on deglobalization. Brad, as usual, paragraph by paragraph, you're blistering. In 2023, the United States imported twice as many pharmaceutical products from Ireland as it did from Canada, China, India, and Mexico combined. Which myth of deglobalization is the worst one?
Well, I think the biggest myth of deglobalization is that it is actually happening. If you look at data, and the data on pharmaceuticals is a perfectly good example, we're importing a lot more pharmaceuticals than we have in the past. Globalization in the pharmaceutical sector is deeply tied to tax avoidance, hence the prominence of Ireland. And we have yet to effectively reform America's tax code in a way to undercut the incentives that have led almost all the major American pharmaceutical companies to produce abroad, report profits abroad. The typical American drug company loses money, according to its SEC reporting, and loses big amounts of money on its U.S. operations and makes all of its profit abroad.
Right.
And as a result, it pays no tax in the U.S. So in that sense, the incentives that propelled tax-fueled globalization haven't gone away.
Brad, the only thing Washington agrees on is one, the Washington Nationals suck. And the other thing they agree on is China, China, China. They're bad, they're ugly. You have been proactive about saying we need to establish a relationship with China. What is the better relationship with China?
Well, look, I've also been pretty critical of many of China's policies. I believe that we should talk to the Chinese. I don't think there's any advantage to living in cones of silence. But I also think that China's on a policy path that has left its economy more reliant on exports than is healthy for China, healthy for the rest of the world. So the positive policy path is one where President Xi frankly changes course, agrees to support household demand, and re-equilibrates the Chinese economy so that it doesn't have to export ever more. The one thing I think people don't realize about the past 5 years is that over the past 5 years, China's exports have increased by about $1 trillion. That's a little less than a percentage point of the GDP of its trading partners. And China's become more, not less, dependent on demand from the rest of the world.
So given that backdrop, Brad, I mean, it seems like we're getting some mixed messages from the U.S. On the one hand, we have higher tariffs, not just under President Trump, but also under President Biden. Now we have some EU tariffs on Chinese vehicles. We have that on the one hand, but on the other hand, we have a parade of U.S. CEOs from Tim Cook to Elon Musk going over to China, trying to build ties here. Shouldn't there be some better coordination between public and private from the U.S. side?
That's not really how our system works. That may be how China's systems work, but it's not how the U.S. system works. Elon Musk will make decisions that are good for Elon Musk. I think we've seen that. The U.S. government has to make decisions that are good for the American public. I do think in the case of electric vehicles, it is appropriate to put some limits on our imports from China to allow American electric vehicle manufacturers to scale up in the United States to catch up with China. I think what people often forget is that China has achieved its advantage in electric vehicles, not by truly liberal policies, but by very active industrial policies. China's electric vehicle industry has long been protected by tariffs. And China has very strong Buy Chinese provisions linked to its EV subsidies, and it's thrown money at its battery producers. China's ahead. We need to catch up, and I think that's what the administration.
But Brad, this is important. This is a conversation out of Toyota and the death of, say, Rochester Delco and the rest of the American auto industry, and maybe its migration down south is where. In the next election, let's assume the two of them make it to the finish line. What should be the Setzer, Biden, or Trump EV policy?
Look, I think the problem, if it's the Setzer-Trump policy, is that Setzer and Trump will be making opposite arguments. Trump seems to think we shouldn't transition to electric vehicles, to want to pull the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies for EV production away. And he will likely, in a sense, say, we've got plenty of oil and gas in the United States. What's the problem with continuing to rely on combustion engine cars? I think the Setzer-Biden approach would be more congruent. I think we have established that we want to move forward with the electric vehicle transition. I think we need to modify aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act so that some of the subsidies are available to cars produced within the G7 with all of our allies. It'd be great if we could do a subsidy sharing agreement with Europe so that European-made cars will qualify for U.S. subsidies and U.S.-made cars, whether from Tesla or GM, qualify for Europe subsidies. I think that would establish competition without relying on imports from China. But I also think we'll probably have to modify certain policies because it's really hard to have tariffs on China alone. Chinese companies are going to go global and be exporting from places other than China.
Dr. Setzer, thank you so much. Folks, it is my first read of the summer, The Dangerous Myth of Deglobalization in Foreign Affairs magazine. It's just 11 pages. Just shut up and read it. Brad Setzer, clear as he can, the Whitney Shepardson Senior Fellow at CFR. Full disclosure, I'm a member of CFR as well. Paul, I'm sorry, we got a bid on the screen. I guess we're waiting for the next 10-to-1 stock split. We mentioned that earlier. NASDAQ up 0.7%.
Yeah.
That's where we are.
Yeah, so we've got kind of a mixed tape out there, Tom. You got the S&P up about 7 points. The Dow off 220 points. That's about 0.6%. But as you mentioned, Tom, the NASDAQ, the tech, again, leading it here, up 0.6%. That's 112 points on the NASDAQ here. Yields coming in just a little bit, Tom, off about 3-4 basis points on your 10-year, 4.27% on your 10-year. And WTI crude oil, I'm going to call that out because I know Alex Steele follows that, $78.65, up just a couple of pennies.
Is she in today?
She is in today.
Has there been a sighting?
I think there has been. Yeah, I think there has been. So we will get, so it's going to be Lisa Mateo, Alex Steele, and me. Which one does not belong there?
That's great.
Yep.
Oh, okay. 2-year yield, 4.72%. 10-year, 4.28%. I should say. I've been looking at the real yield, which is still range bound. I really want to mention that. The real yield gyrating 2.05% is not really broken down to a new disinflation yield. Oh, we played Susanna Hoffs. You can't play Susanna Hoffs if you don't play Belinda Carlisle. Heaven. It's a place I know.